You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news, events, and more in our states as well as across our divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, going into the headlines this morning. First up in COVID news, at least 4,111 new coronavirus deaths and 280,000 new cases were reported in the United States on January 7th. That is another new high. It has not broken the 4,000 death mark yet, sad to say. I mean, I'm happy to say that it hasn't yet, but it has now, 4,111. Over the past week, there has been an average of 237,607 cases per day, and an increase of 15% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of Friday morning, 21,689,000 people in the United States have been infected, and over 365,000 people have died. The global tally of coronavirus infection cases has exceeded 88 million people, while the death toll is over 1.89 million, and the number of people who have recovered is 49 million. The United States, India, and Brazil are in the lead in terms of the number of registered coronavirus infections, while the highest number of COVID-19 related deaths has been observed in the United States, Brazil, India, and Mexico. Chinese officials ordered the lockdown of Shijiazhuang, almost certainly mispronouncing that, capital of Hebei province, a city of 11 million people, as coronavirus cases spiked there. The province neighbors the nation's capital of Beijing. The U.S. CDC is now carefully monitoring allergic reactions to the coronavirus vaccine. The U.S. Public Health Agency said allergic reactions are occurring at a rate of 11.1 per 1 million vaccinations. In comparison, for the flu shot, such reactions occur at a rate of 1.3 per 1 million shots. So almost 10 times as many people. Let's put it that way. 8 to 9 times as many people are having allergic reactions to the coronavirus vaccine as they would to flu shots. So for what that's worth, and we will come back to that. I'm sure that we'll be talking about that going forward in the future. A healthy Miami doctor died 16 days after receiving the Pfizer vaccine. Dr. Gregory Michael began seeing small spots on his hands and feet 3 days after the shot. He went to the hospital. His blood count was not in the normal ranges. He was admitted to the ICU, and then he suffered a stroke and died. According to the U.S. CDC, there have been cases of partial facial paralysis, as well as being fully paralyzed for hours following the injection. Now, Jamarl, I want to pause on this. There's obviously national political news having to do with the breach of the Capitol on Wednesday, and more. Bitcoin jumped a crazy amount, but that's maybe marginal. But on the vaccine, I think you were the one to first pose the sort of essential question here, in my opinion, which is, say the virus kills more people than the vaccine does, but the vaccine is still, it's still a bit dangerous. It's still experimental. And even just, whether it's using the novel technique or using it without testing it on a broad sample of people, whatever the case, the fact that it's doing this at a greater rate than most vaccines, apparently, you raised the question, does that make it worth it? Should we still do it if it's going to save lives on net, but it gives you a risk of potentially an allergic reaction or Bell's palsy or even death, although that seems pretty rare at this point. But still, Jamarl, I think you raised that question. At this point, looking at this evidence, what's your take?
Well, I mean, it's anecdotal evidence. It's not like whether or not the vaccine was directly related to the death, I don't know. And, the other cases that people are talking about, again, I don't know. This notion of correlation versus, direct causal relationship, that I don't know. My thing was, and I don't even know if the vaccine is dangerous. I don't know any of that stuff. I mean, the mRNA is a new way of doing it. And like all scientific, leaps or jumps forward, there's always this kind of testing thing to figure out the contours of it. And so I don't take the position that something is wrong with the vaccine. I don't know that one way or the other. I would say this, though. I do think it's an interesting question to ask, and I do think it's a fair question to ask. If, I don't know, you had 300, 400,000 people die in the United States, and you find out that the vaccine works for, let's say, 95% of the population, but there's a small population size that has some kind of consequence, let's say 1%. If you find out that out of all of the people who take the vaccine, 1% have negative symptoms, is that reason to stop taking the vaccine? I'm fascinated with that question because that means that on probability, the overwhelming majority of the people, 99% of the time, when you take it, you're going to be great. But if there's that 1%, let's say it's even half of 1%.
At this point, looking at it, I mean, they're saying an allergy rate of 11.1 per 1 million. That's about 1 in 100,000. That is about 1% of 1%.
Okay. Right. That's what I mean, right? So it's like one random person is going to take a hit. But is that a reason to scuttle the vaccine? I don't think so.
And I was wrong there. I just realized I should have taken it a step further. It is 0.1% of 1%.
Yeah,
so
that's what I mean, right? That's what I mean. Like the one random guy. I'm sorry, dog. You got to take the hit. Like you can't stop the vaccine for the one random guy that has the a genetic makeup that's antagonistic to the vaccine. And look, I'm sympathetic to people, though, when it's new science and the science is just being understood and it's being developed and everything else. I'm sympathetic to people on that front. But that's not a reason to stop the research and the science. I don't buy that argument. You know what I mean? Like, if it's a trolley problem in an odd way, but it's a trolley problem where it's like half of an individual is on one side of the trolley. And the rest of the world is, not. So.
Yeah. I think, I'll be honest, I think that calculus is a little bit easier for me. I've got weird autoimmune stuff that's been going on for years, and it's active this year in a way that it hasn't been before. And I'm like, that's a comorbidity. People who get COVID are more likely to die if they have serious autoimmune issues or even more mild ones, as far as I can tell.
Well, wait, there's a catch with that.
So
there's a catch. If you have an autoimmune disease, whether or not you can take the vaccine, you may not be able to take it. You may not be able to take it.
I hear what you're saying. I'm kind of a borderline case. I've got like a skin condition that's not life-threatening by any means, but it is related to, weird autoreactivity stuff. And so I don't think they would prohibit me from taking it. And frankly, I would be willing to take the vaccine knowing that there's a risk, simply because if I were to catch COVID, I'm not saying it's like a 10% chance that I'd die from it or suffer serious symptoms. It's more like a 0.1% chance. But even that, if the vaccine is dramatically less likely to give me symptoms, and if I have a reasonable likelihood of catching COVID as it spreads, and particularly as this new strain shows signs of, not just showing up in the U.S., but undoubtedly quickly spreading through community spread in the U.S., it's just that from a cost-benefit analysis, it would make sense for me to take the vaccine. Now, it might be different for people who don't have those comorbidities, who are sort of having to take one for the team, even in a weird sense, where like they're not really worried about catching COVID, and it's unlikely that they're going to suffer the detrimental effects of the vaccine, but they're having to make a choice of potentially doing this potentially dangerous thing, even if it's not very dangerous at all, which, when people have to make that choice, there's like a fear that kicks in, if you know what I'm saying, where people are less willing to do that if there's a sort of public good situation where they're not personally going to benefit from it necessarily. Does that make any sense, Jamarl? We got more headlines.
It does make sense. No, I think I understand what you mean. I do understand what you mean. I don't know. I guess I don't see this as being dangerous. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, of all the things that you can do, I mean, for God's sake, I've jumped out of a perfectly good airplane. Taking a vaccine seems less dangerous. And I get it. It's mRNA. It's slightly different than the typical way they do vaccines. But I'm sorry, science progresses and they try stuff. They try to learn from stuff. They try to expand the ability. And the idea that they won't try to find ways to speed up the creation of a vaccine, why wouldn't they speed that up? Why wouldn't they try to find shortcuts? Of course they're going to try to find those things. Is it potentially dangerous? Yes. doesn't mean they shouldn't do it.
But here's the thing, man. We had this is what bugs the heck out of me. They had, identified the sequence of this virus back in January. The delay here wasn't a manufacturing delay. Sure, there's some of that, but what caused it to be released much later in the year wasn't that it couldn't be manufactured. It was that they had to go through a sort of long trial review process. They had this exact same vaccine, and they knew early on in the trials that there was a dramatically reduced rate of people showing COVID symptoms after they took the vaccine. So they knew that within the first couple of weeks of the trials. Within a month, after they'd seen the rapid drop-off, if we had a different culture, they could have released it and saved, I don't even know, I'd have to go back and look how many hundreds of thousands of lives, 200,000, maybe 300,000, depending on when they got it into gear. Of course, there's going to be a delay. They start, they put out the call that it's basically ready to go as an extremely experimental sort of emergency vaccine program. People start manufacturing it. A couple months later, it starts getting distributed. And a couple of months later, it reaches full saturation. That could have happened in summer of this year. I've made this point before. And you were kind of just getting at it, Jamarl. Anyway, we got other headlines.
But wouldn't that be a little dicey? I mean, like that's basically shortcutting the results.
We're talking about cost benefit analysis.
Because I think your point is, look, 400,000 people are about to drop dead. You got to do something. It's like you got to pony up, dog. You got to do something. You can't let that happen. I feel you on that.
And we got a new, more virulent strain spreading too. Yeah. And we're not really. I don't think we're seeing that yet. I think this is just the sort of horrible regular cold and flu exacerbation of it, and then in spring we're going to see that new strain start to kick in.
One more later thing, just to interject real quick. You're also going to see the White House, the super spreader event that's going to take place from what we saw yesterday. I think you're going to see that too. Most of those people didn't have masks on. You heard Bob said one guy apparently kissed another guy and screamed out super spreader. I don't mean to laugh at that, but it's funny. But no, I think that's going to be another spreading event. It's all through the White House, all through, like, many of those people didn't have on masks. And the congressmen, many of the Republican congressmen that were in there with the Democrats, they would not wear masks. You're going to see another event in D.C.
I hear you. You know what? There might be some of that, and certainly it will symbolically cause that. I think the day-to-day bread and butter of how this virus spreads is just like indoor parties, indoor congregations, family to family, in workplaces, that kind of thing, and like tightly enclosed spaces, and just on a broad basis throughout the population. That's why, whether it's this, admittedly, they stormed Congress, which is a building within which they were enclosed, but whether it's this or the Black Lives Matter protesters, sure, there's going to be some spread there. But I don't think it would compare really to especially with the Black Lives Matter protests. I don't think it would really compare to, if you're indoors with somebody on a constant basis for hours, that kind of thing. But we got more headlines here. I don't want to just push back on you and move on. They're very, very well could be spread there too. Let's go to national political news. Shortly after Twitter unlocked Trump's account yesterday, he tweeted a video discussing the Capitol breach and Biden. It acknowledged Biden will be inaugurated on January 20th and described the Capitol breach as a heinous attack, quote unquote. A U.S. Capitol police officer has died from injuries sustained in the attack on Congress by a pro-Trump mob of insurrectionary/rioters, as top Democrats have called for the president to be removed for inciting the riot. Two of Trump's cabinet secretaries, Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao and Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, are resigning over the riot. By the way, Elaine Chao, primary qualification here, Transportation Secretary. She is also the wife of Mitch McConnell, just pointing that out. There are many administration officials that announced their resignation as well, many others. We went over some of those yesterday. Thursday, world leaders reacted to the Capitol riots. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson issued a strong condemnation against both the rioters and President Trump. Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven condemned Trump. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani called Trump a quote-unquote sick person who had disgraced his country during a televised speech. Konstantin Kosachev, the chairman of the Russian Upper House Foreign Affairs Committee, said the storming signaled the derailment of American democracy. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said during a meeting on Thursday that the riots made her feel, quote unquote, angry and sad, and that she, quote, regrets very much that President Trump did not admit defeat in November and again yesterday, ending quote. And Scotland's Justice Minister Humza Yousaf is calling on officials to deny President Trump's entry into the UK, blaming him directly for inciting a violent mob at the nation's capital. I am going to briefly mention here two quick tech headlines. Bitcoin has crossed the $41,000 mark for the first time. Again, that's $41,000. Remember back in 2017, if you were following this stuff, I think it was the beginning of 2017. I never really traded this. Never traded it, in fact. But it was down to like 3,000. It's oscillating like crazy. And over the past 2 months, really longer than that, but concentrated sort of within the past 2 months, it has been on a roller coaster ride upwards. We'll see when it goes on a roller coaster ride downwards. And in our next headline, Bloomberg has posted an article confirming that Jeff Bezos is no longer the richest person in the world. Elon Musk has now taken that title. Following Thursday's trading day, Elon Musk is worth $191 billion and Jeff Bezos $187 billion American dollars. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And you know what? We could talk. There's more to talk about here, all over the place. We really didn't even talk about the Capitol breach, riots. One brief note, and then I'm going to take us out so we can get to Jamarl's soapbox segment. What we didn't really talk about yesterday is the sort of foreign disgrace that this event was, and we're seeing that in greater force, and we're going to see that much more radically, I would say, over the next couple of years in past reference by foreign leaders. And by the sorts of transactions we're able to negotiate, the sorts of deals we're able to do with foreign leaders after what they saw happen in the US. I don't want to make too much out of it, but in terms of a long-term drift and a long-term degradation of American power, this, more than Trump's presidency as a whole, more than pretty much any other single factor, I would say, shows clearly that we are on a downward trend as an international moral and political leader. If we ever, and I'm not trying to say that we were ever a paragon by any means, but this was not a good look. Anyway, we're going into a break here. We will be back in a minute with Jamarl's soapbox segment. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. Also, if you're digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. A few things happened yesterday as the fallout continues from basically the attack on Capitol Hill. I am not one of those people that is downplaying this. I think this is extremely significant, and I think this is extremely a big deal. It's one thing to see a police station in flames. If you think seeing a police station in flames, seeing the Capitol of the United States sieged, attacked, where Congress members are basically being huddled away as they proceed with the duties dictated by the Constitution of the United States to certify the election results. It's an astonishing thing to watch. And I get some right-wingers want to downplay this as not that big of a deal that the Capitol was stormed, not that big of a deal that the Congress, the people's body, as it did its work, whether you agree with them or not, as it did its work, was basically assaulted by right-wingers, militia members, and Trump supporters to basically stop them from certifying the results. Understand the gravity of this. At the end of it, the president of the United States is screaming that the election was stolen from him. Now, this in and of itself is a massive deal. If the president of the United States is toppled basically a coup, ripping it away. It is a crime that is probably higher than maybe any other crime that could be part of our country. Treason, to put it mildly. That's basically what Donald Trump was claiming. With all of the money in the world, with all of the lawyers at his disposal, Donald Trump couldn't find bupkis. In one court case after the next, it was basically thrown out. Hugo Chavez's ghost, working with the Cubans, Brian Kemp in Georgia, in the Dominion machines, supposedly, to stop Trump from getting an election. All of those people that sieged the Capitol yesterday had the explicit intent of basically stopping the process of the election, stopping the constitutional responsibility of Congress to certify the results. And more importantly, if they got what they wanted, Trump would have been installed God King. It had to be God King because he wouldn't be president of America because you have to actually win the election to become president of America, something that Donald Trump decidedly did not do. This is a massive, massive deal. You must understand, revolutions and civil wars have a language created by the exploited, but also, well, not just the exploited, but the exploited and the delusional to explain their struggle. No pun intended. Actions like marching and taking the Capitol, either in Russia, Germany, and Italy, worked with great propagandistic effect. This run on the Capitol is not the first time this has happened, and likely will not be the last time it happened. The actions taken will beget more actions. People look at this with all of the news and all of the media and all of the negative publicity. I hate to tell you this, but negative publicity is not negative to the alienated. And in this very specific instance, you have a lot of people getting a lot of publicity that will likely embolden more actions. The point in all of this is to grow numbers. The point of this is publicity. The point of this is to have this big show where people can watch and other people who feeling alienated for whatever particular reason can join in. Just like the Nazis on this stuff, they weren't politically wed to any particular idea. You had some socialist ideas, you had some right-wing ideas, you had some nationalistic ideas, basically whatever would draw people in. If they need to take on this notion of evictions, they will take on the notion of evictions. If they need to take on the notion of medical bills, if they need to take on the notion of deaths even, all of these things will be folded into grievances and complaints to get as many people as possible to join and swell their numbers. My point is that the actions that you saw yesterday will beget additional actions because I wager that that was seen as a success. That was probably seen as a major, major success. The euphoria from watching that I would imagine some right-wingers have or some militia members have will beget more actions. And it will make those actions that much more extreme when those actions take place again. Donald Trump is not your issue at this point. Donald Trump will be leaving the White House. And the fact of the matter is, this action basically ended up jumping the shark, so much so that Donald Trump had to concede. They're actively talking about taking Donald Trump out in 2 weeks, and the 2 weeks that he has left, ripping him from the office. You could say that it's doing so to humiliate his supporters, but by the same token, you can also say that Donald Trump earned it by emboldening his supporters to basically do exactly what they did. More interesting in this, and I kind of pointed out yesterday, that this is not an issue of incompetence. This is an issue of complicity. That the officers, right-wingers, have a tendency to fall in line with cops. Hand in glove. It never fails. In this very specific instance, I showed the video yesterday where the cops, some of them, let these guys through. Protesters they don't make it into the Capitol without some level of complicity with the law enforcement and the officers that are nearby. This is Politico. One current Metro DC police officer said in a public Facebook post that off-duty police officers and members of the military who were among the rioters flashed their badges and ID cards as they attempted to overrun the building. Quote, if these people can storm the Capitol building with no regard for punishment, you have to wonder how much they abuse their powers when they put on their uniforms, the officer wrote. Yes, it does make you wonder that. And that's kind of the rub, right? All of the people that were involved in this, they're making the point that some of these people were cops, that the only way they would have been able to get into the Capitol is if there was complicity on the inside. This is not an issue of, oh, these guys were just incompetent. This is not an issue of, oh, they just didn't know what they were doing or they just weren't doing their jobs. No, this was an issue that some of these right-wingers and some of these cops saw eye to eye. I understand that people think that politicians or that congressmen or that police or military officials, that the office or that the label or the title extends beyond the individual, that the individual is somehow transcended by the role or the position. Nonsense. It is true sometimes it's not. In fact of the matter is, just because it's a cop or police or military officer or whatever, doesn't necessarily mean they don't fundamentally agree with the ideology and agree in a way and agree to such an extent that they are willing to bypass, to ignore their constitutional responsibilities, or for that matter, the responsibilities of their office or their job in order to allow something like this to proceed. It's a big deal. And I get some lefties are like, oh, that's great. It's not. And I get some right-wingers who want to downplay it. Don't. It is a massive deal. Your country was basically, the power structure of your country was basically undermined. And it was undermined live on television, meaning the sovereignty of the United States was undermined live on television in front of a bunch of right-wingers to watch and observe and to know that they have tacit approval and support by elements of law enforcement. It's a big, big deal. And I don't think it should be ignored. And I strongly will put to you that this will likely happen again. Trump's press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, comes out. Those who are violent besiege that Capitol of the opposite of everything this administration stands for. Nonsense. Donald Trump comes out and gives this video where he basically repudiates what happened yesterday, meaning the people besieged the building, and attacks his supporters after calling them basically nice people yesterday. Astonishing! You realize Donald Trump attacking his supporters doesn't mean anything. The actions were already there. They already know what Donald Trump thinks about this because Donald Trump has already told people what he thought about this. Anything said after the fact, it's the save face. And at this point, it's a little too late. These activities will happen again. These activities will get worse. Mark my words. Shane, what do you think? I think it's a big deal. I know some right-wingers don't think it's a big deal. I think they think it's overblown. I think they've lost their minds. And I think this is the tribal politics stuff again. That if they weren't part of that clique, they would find this to be much bigger deal than they think it is. What do you think?
And to be clear here, the right conservatives, as far as I can tell, are divided, and they are more divided than they were before this moment happened. Because I've seen some people come out and say this is a huge deal; they no longer support Trump, and then I've seen other people, like you're saying, just throw their lot back in further, either try to diminish it by like you're saying that it's not that big of a deal, that the left was doing it throughout the summer. There's no parallel there, I would say. And then some people are, of course, blaming Antifa, claiming that busloads of them were brought in. Which is ridiculous as far as I could tell. There's no proof of that. And it's just an attempt to diminish the gravity of what actually happened here. That's point one. And more broadly, it is huge. There's no way of diminishing it. Realistically, in the long run, this is going to be seen as a travesty. Here's the thing, though. You're saying that this is going to be taken, and I agree with you, frankly, this is going to be taken as a sign of success, as a sort of success, and as a sign of victory by some people. Not complete victory, but a victory in the battle. The right was able to do this, and so if you're on the right, you're going to be looking at this kind of emboldened by that. On the other hand, and I don't know where this goes exactly, but if you look at what they actually did, it was nonsensical. It was purely performative. They broke into the Capitol building as if that alone would steer the wheel of the American state in some other direction, as if that alone amounted to a genuine revolution. It was entertainment, and it was disgusting entertainment, and it was genuinely insurrectionary, but it was so incompetent. I don't know what they were expecting would happen. And so the thing about it being performative is that symbolically and as a sort of image in American history, it will serve as a precedent for more. And that is part of why it's so dangerous. And it would have been particularly dangerous had Trump not started to walk it back. Like he did the tiniest bit, the very slightest bit by asking them to go home on Wednesday, despite saying that he loved them and that they were very special people, and which he has done more fully yesterday. But it's still very dangerous. Anyway, we need to go into a break here. We'll be back to continue this conversation with Carmine Sabia. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to cash them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we are joined by our guest, Carmine Sabia. He is a writer and the editor-at-large at SabiaReport.com. Follow him on Twitter at Carmine Sabia and watch the Carmine Sabia show by going to, again, SabiaReport.com. Also, we need to update your bio, I think. You have like a Patreon, right, Carmine?
No,
something
not
like
Patreon.
that you can
I
throw
do
in.
a rock fin.
Oh, thank you. And how can people find that rock fin just before we get into it?
Well, this is going to shock you, but it's rockfin.com/Sabia Report.
There we go. All right. I will add that to your bio. Make sure we add that. How are you doing, and what did you think of what happened on Wednesday? Let's start off with you personally, but then let's get into the details. What's going on, Carmine?
Doing great. Because I wasn't a crazy person that believed Little Wood or Sidney Powell, so of course I knew the results of the election were going to be certified, and I'm not shocked by anything like so many of my friends are, who would not listen to me. What I think what happened Wednesday, disgraceful. It was an embarrassment. It was an embarrassment to us as conservatives, and just an embarrassment to the nation. It's a dark stain on our country, and people are going to remember it forever.
Carmine, real quick, that serves to start us off. We have a slightly bad connection. So you're just cutting. We can hear most of what you're saying. We can hear what you're saying effectively, but it's a little bit hard to listen to. We're going to get you off and then bring you back on. And that says most of what I would be wanting to hear here effectively. Anyway, we're in the process of getting Carmine Sabia.
I got to be honest, I wasn't sure what he was going to say. I didn't know what I had no idea what was going to come out of his mouth. I thought he was going to say something like, it's a disgrace that the people were complaining about, the people sieging the Capitol or something. So, yeah, it's good that
and like he's saying, I think part of what made the difference is that he wasn't in the Powell Lynn Wood crowd.
Yeah. I mean, and keep in mind, some of the videos or some of the pictures show people with zip ties. Like, zip ties indicate hostages. You don't bring zip ties for no reason. Like, some of these people could have been shot. We had no idea. They found pipe bombs. Like, this was far more serious than, this shouldn't be downplayed. The capital of the U.S. was sieged in real terms. That's a monstrous idea. I mean, that shouldn't be tolerated at all. It's funny. In other countries, when something like this is happening, we call them freedom-loving fascists. But in the United States, we just call them, basically, I suppose, Republicans. But yeah, is Carmine back? Carmine back?
We have him back.
Okay. Yeah, it's just so very strange. If this was the Ukraine, we would be pushing these guys on. If this was Hong Kong, we'd be cheering them on. Isn't it sad? Yeah. Like, I don't think Americans understand or entirely get that if you think this is bad here, the people in those countries also think it's bad when it happens to them. Yeah, freedom-loving fascists. Freedom-loving fascists. I mean, what did they think was going to happen? Honestly. Like, the moment that you breached the gates, then what? Like, they trashed Pelosi's office. Apparently, they took one of the laptops from one of the other senators or congressmen. Look, to me, in very real terms, if they got what they wanted, this would have been a different country, because it couldn't have been America, because they didn't win the election. No, this is a big deal. What they wanted to accomplish was dramatic and devastating, and it should be regarded as such. Not to mention the security failure on this stuff, even from the standpoint of what they were talking about. You know, Pelosi was talking about the police officers and how they were giving them heads up, saying, not Pelosi, I'm sorry, I think it was Maxine Waters, was basically saying that they were giving them heads up like, yeah, it's secure, or that nobody is ever going to make it to the Capitol, everything is great. And then this happens. It's amazing. Shane.
Well, we have Carmine on.
Oh, there we are.
Carmine, you're with us, right?
I didn't know if you guys had me back yet.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
We do. Yeah. What are your thoughts, man?
Well, like I said, it's shameful. It's disgraceful. It's an embarrassment to conservatives. It's an embarrassment to the country. But there's a but. I don't think if you are a Trump supporter, I don't think it erases 4 years of accomplishments, and I don't think it erases 4 years of everything he's done. I have a lot of mixed feelings, to be honest with you. I think it ends any chance he'll ever run ever again or be successful at it ever again. I think it's that big of a deal.
Let me ask you, you think it damaged his presidency, basically? Like, whatever happened in the context of the presidency, whether you think it was good or bad or anything else, you think this moment is like a stain?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, yeah.
Now, explain why, though. I'm curious from your standpoint of, like, what's the thing that makes this that damning of an event to take place?
Well, you have first of all, you have the media who hate you, right? They're going to play this on a loop every time they talk about your presidency. This will be the first video they play when your presidency is talked about, every time from now until the end of time. So that's a big deal. The second thing is you got Giuliani talking about war, and you got Trump.
Trial by combat. That's what he literally on the day of when he was speaking to the marchers. This is, as Trump had asked the marchers to march on Congress. Giuliani's talking about trial by combat. Don Jr.'s talking about how we will come for you. We're coming for you. We're going to be in your backyards. We're going to have a good time doing it. All on the day of.
Now, you got Trump did say be peaceful, but all that other rhetoric is heard. And I don't think you can blame the president for what happened. I don't believe that. I don't believe you can blame anybody but the people who did it for what happened. And I don't think what he did was, I was going to say, Stranahan, I disagree with you when you say you can't draw a parallel between this and the riot that happened the entire summer. I think that the Democrat reaction to this, because it's in their backyard, versus the other riots because they're in our backyard, is the height of hypocrisy. The height of
okay, so here's let me respond to that real quick. What you saw, for instance, in Portland, you saw months of back and forth. You saw like folks on the left like graffitiing places, breaking in windows, doing like thousands of dollars of property damage. Admittedly, if this is writ large across the entire country, that's on a larger scale. But you didn't have them storming the Capitol. And even if you were to say that they would have, if they could have, if there weren't, and I'm not sure that they would have, but even if you were to say that if there weren't a sustained police presence at the Capitol building, keeping them from doing that they would have done that at some point, that begs a question. It leads me to wonder, why the hell wasn't there a sustained police presence at the Capitol during this? This is a conversation about complicity that we're having, where there is undeniably a certain degree of complicity simply because the perimeter of the Capitol wasn't nearly as well protected as it could have been and obviously should have been in order to prevent, these rioters, this mob, from coming in. Carmine, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I don't understand that at all. I don't understand that at all. Where the hell was, I mean, they had like 5 police officers there? What happened? What happened?
Seriously? I mean, okay, Carmine. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think there is a difference in the way police, let's say, treat, I don't know, Black Lives Matter protesters as compared to, let's say, the protesters from the other day? If these were BLM protesters at the White House, do you think it would have been this lax police presence, or do you think it would have been, tanks, oceans of tear gas?
To be honest with you, if I'm being really honest with you, not necessarily Black Lives Matter protesters, who about 75% of are white. What I said was, if there was a group of black men storming the Capitol like that, they would have been slaughtered. They would have been slaughtered before they got to the door.
But I think that answers your question. If you're saying, like, I don't know what happened, where was everybody? It's there, right? I mean, isn't it there? Isn't that your answer? Well, they didn't see these guys with the same level of threat. And, like I said and read the Political article, the Political article right here, one current Metro DC police officer said in a public Facebook post that off-duty police officers and members of the military who were among the rioters flashed their badges and ID cards as they attempted to overrun the building. It wasn't just incompetence, it was complicity. This is kind of the point that Shane was making. It wasn't that, oh, golly gee, we had no idea this was going to happen. No, it was, we, on some level, some of us, just agree. Is that what we're seeing here, Carmine?
I think that definitely. I mean, you saw kind of some police officers stepping out of the way too. So, yeah.
And like getting selfies inside the building. I mean, you might have seen that video of the Capitol Police inside the Capitol building being willing to take selfies with the rioters who had breached the Capitol building by force, who'd, blown in windows and raided it, and were at that time contemporarily raiding the offices of Congress and posing on the dais of the Senate floor in a bull headdress and just doing all sorts of crazy things. I don't mean to talk too much, but
no. But can I ask you a question though?
Please.
Because I've been thinking about this. What do we have the Second Amendment for?
Well, to protect against a tyrannical government and to provide for militias, which can serve as a sort of auxiliary force, either in the event of a foreign invasion or in the event of tyranny above.
The Second Amendment was there as militias to protect from slave controls. They didn't want slave rights.
So, all right. So, if you really believed, if you believed in your heart, I don't believe Joe Biden won fairly. I don't. But I also don't believe there's evidence to prove that, and that's why the election had to be certified. I think it would be. I think sometimes thieves are really good at stealing stuff, and sometimes thieves win. That being said, I can't prove that. You know what I'm saying? And I could be completely wrong about that, and I understand and respect that. But if you believe so much in your heart that your government was just stolen from you, okay? Imagine if people had used the Second Amendment to try and take back the government, because that's what it's there for. So if this riot where they went in and messed up some papers and knocked down some statues in the hall, and if this is seen as these are terrorists, what the heck would taking back the government from a tyrannical government look like?
Let's say it would look like. Well, because we only have a minute, and I want to give you guys, if he's asking you a question, I want to give you time to answer. So I'm going to let Shane bring you back and get the answer and everything else. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. The voice you guys are hearing is Carmine Sabia, writer and editor-at-large at thesabiareport.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Carmine Sabia. He's our guest. He's the writer and editor at large at SabiaReport.com. And you can watch that show by going to SabiaReport.com and rockfin.com/SabiaReport. Also follow him on Twitter at Carmine Sabia. Carmine, before we went into a break, you asked the question, if this was the sort of expression of the sentiment that led to the passing of the Second Amendment, if this was an attempt to overthrow what its followers saw, what its adherents saw as a tyrannical government, and if this didn't involve a lot of guns being brought to the Capitol and, the waging of a sort of genuine, violent, and forceful attempt at insurrection, what would that look like? What would that process of revolution, if you want to paint it in a slightly more positive light, or insurrection, if you want to downplay its validity, what would that process look like? And I would say it would look like this, but a lot worse, very simply. It would look like more terrorism. And that's why, for me, I know that it's hard, but I'll put it like this. If your choice is a contest, and it doesn't just come down to this, but if your choice is a contest of violence between you and the extremely powerful force of the United States government, and if it's a choice between that and building up institutions that can rival the legitimacy of Congress, outside of Congress, as a sort of people's movement that genuinely represents the interests of the United States and is increasingly gaining power as a sort of auxiliary force to Congress, like a state within a state that surpasses the American state in its legitimacy and in its ability to actually solve problems. In my opinion, if you do, this is a little bit bland comparatively, but if you build up institutions that can then themselves compete with and take over the American government, can themselves, and I don't mean take over by force, but I mean by being better than them and a truer expression of the values that drove the spiritual center of America, however you want to look at this. I see that as having a lot more efficacy. I see that as being a lot more constructive. And I see that as genuinely creating like a sustainable replacement for the problem. If you come in there with guns, not only is that not going to work, not only are you rightfully going to be decried as a mere insurrectionary, but what comes on the other side of that? What comes on the other side of practically any violent revolution? For the most part, chaos and the creation of a more authoritarian form of rule on the other side. So I tried to respond to it as well as give an alternative there. Carmine, what's your take?
Sure. Now, I want to be clear. I do not support any kind of violent revolution, and I would be disgusted by anybody who tried it. But then what I'm saying is, are we as conservatives really then just paying lip service to the Second Amendment? We don't really need it.
I mean, Carmine, you're basically saying that conservatives don't have the courage of their convictions because they didn't go in guns blazing? Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying what would ultimately require the use of the Second Amendment, or are we just lying to ourselves when we say that's what we have the Second Amendment for? Because we actually have no intention of ever taking back the government if we believe it's tyrannical.
Carmine, let me ask you this. When do you need an amendment to tell you to take back the government if necessary? Meaning, if you were in oppressive conditions, do you really need something written on a piece of paper to give you permission to take back the government? Or do you do it because it's in your vital interest to do so?
You need the amendment in order to keep the guns to do it.
No, you don't. I'm telling you, you don't. I guess I'm making the point that the amendment is not real. The Constitution, none of those things are real. If you feel that your government has become tyrannical and your government has a rule that says, okay, you have this particular amendment where you can pull the latch if you need to. I'm telling you, you don't. I guess the point I'm making here is if you're having an armed insurrection, the Second Amendment is not going to justify it. The power structure is not going to be okay with an armed insurrection under any circumstances. The Second Amendment is not going to justify it.
What I'm saying to you is, if you go to England and they wanted to take back their government became tyrannical. They can't. They have no weapons because they don't have a right to keep and bear them. Those people I have a lot of friends in England. Believe me, they have no weapons.
I see what you mean. Okay, that makes sense. But by the same token, are you really going to match force with the government?
No, you're not. You're not. So what I'm saying is, please don't misunderstand me. I do not in any way condone or want an armed insurrection. I would be mortified by that, and I would hope that the government would put it down with quickness. But what I'm saying is, then, are we just lying to ourselves and our people when we say that's what the Second Amendment is for? Are we just giving lip service to something that we would be horrified if they ever actually did it? Or what kind of overreach of government would then require us to use that, to do that? What would it take, right? So what's the line? Because here's what I'm thinking. A lot of people think that what happened on Wednesday was just because of the election, but I see it differently. I think that's the trigger point. But I also see people who were told, hey, we shut down your businesses. We told you can't work. You got thousands and thousands of dollars worth of back debt that you didn't cause. Here's $600 and good luck to you. I think that's a part of it too. I think people are frustrated. I think there's a tipping point. I think if you didn't have people locked in their homes for a year, stopping them from working, they're desperate, they're destitute. When you get people who do crazy things like that, generally speaking, what you have is people who believe they have nothing left to lose. And I think that's what you saw. And I think you see it with the Black Lives Matter protesters. When you see people that believe, hey, if I get pulled over by the cops, I got a 50-50 shot at getting killed. You know what I'm saying? They feel like they've got nothing left to lose. When people do things like that, it's not because they're like, hey, things are going great in my life, but I'm going to go storm the Capitol. No. Desperate people do things like that. Desperate people put their lives on. You have to know storming the Capitol, you might get shot and killed. You have to know that in your logical mind. So I think at a certain point, people believed they had nothing left to lose. I think they believed that they would get in that building and they would make sure that Trump won that election because he was going to save them in their minds. It was ridiculous. It wasn't going to happen. You know it wasn't going to happen. I know it wasn't going to happen. But I'm trying to put myself in their minds. I think they saw themselves as the revolutionaries in 1776. I really believe they saw that.
I hear what you're saying. So there are a couple of directions we could take this. I'm going to use it to pivot slightly. You're saying they have nothing left to lose. And I agree with you. A lot of these people do have nothing left to lose. But that holds true for a lot of the left. That holds true, frankly, for a lot of Americans. This summer, with the effects of the coronavirus, with the lockdown, which I would, again, I argue for the lockdown and have pretty consistently. Nevertheless, that put a lot of people out of work. A lot of people literally have less and less to lose. And if you're in debt and your net worth is negative, you have less than nothing left to lose. You only have things to gain in some sense. So pivoting on that slightly, looking forward, looking into the future, it doesn't seem like that trend is going to be reversed. It seems like under a Biden administration, which while it may have been emboldened slightly by Wednesday's events, is going to be kind of milquetoast when it comes to providing a lot of things that people actually need, or at least giving them the conditions in which they can provide for themselves. Where does that go? I mean, because that asymmetry of force that you're talking about, that itself makes the Second Amendment kind of moot, where the government has a lot more power than the people by and large. That holds true. And then the fact that more and more people are in a weaker and weaker position and have apparently no way of getting themselves out of that position. Where does that go? Because another way of putting this, more and more people are going to have less and less to lose. Carmine, what's your thought?
It's frightening. I don't know what the answer is because, as I said, people that have nothing left to lose take action. Sometimes that's not good. You had people that were going to kidnap the Michigan governor. Which is psychotic. So I think. Yeah, when you have nothing left to lose, dangerous things happen. And I think the government, if they're just pushing this off, these guys should be charged as terrorists, by the way. They should be charged and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law possible, because what they did is unconscionable. I want to be very clear about that. but I don't think you've seen the end of it if people don't get relief soon. And I don't know what the answer is, because I'm with you. If we don't have the lockdowns, people are going to die. You know, people are going to die. This is bad. I don't know what the answer is. I wish I knew what the answer was, but I think it starts with providing people real money to sustain their lives. I know it's not a conservative thing, right? But we're in exceptional times. We are in exceptional times. When Mitch McConnell ended it at $600, when he said, no, we're not going to give you $2,000, he essentially handed the Senate to the Democrats on that very day. That was the first. I mean, think about this. You got 2 Democrat senators from Georgia and 2 Democrat senators from Arizona. The GOP better do a lot of soul searching for how that happened.
Carmine, I am so glad you said that. I am so glad you said that. Because to me, it was the most rational thing ever, right? Like, does the American public want $2,000? Any random person you ask, hey, do you want $2,000? That person's going to say yes. Even if it's to put it in the bank, most people will say yes. And this is not like any random time. Like, you're talking about, I like to make the point to people that 42% of the public made $18,000 a year before COVID. After COVID, of course, that's only going to get worse. And $2,000 comes up, and the Republican Party basically says no. McConnell doesn't even bring it up for a vote. Nancy Pelosi had sense enough, even though she might have been against it at one point, to at very least put it up for a vote, get that thing passed. And the Republicans in the House had enough sense, many of them, to vote for it. Like, meaning they understood this idea of the pressure that was being applied to them with an American public that was in bad straits. And you're offering them money, and the Republican Party is basically saying no. And Mitch McConnell, by himself, with a red circle drawn around him in the Senate, tells them no, while a Senate race is taking place in Georgia. That would decide the fate of the Senate. Yeah, I think it was exactly what handed that race to the Democrats, or handed the Senate to the Democrats. I think the question becomes, now what for the Republican Party? I mean, what do you do here? I mean, the Democratic Party at one point had the House, Senate, Supreme Court, and basically lost it all almost immediately. The Republicans basically did the same thing. The country seems to be wishy-washing back and forth, stuck between 2 political parties that don't represent its interests, but having nowhere to go but sloshing back and forth.
True.
Where does this go? And I don't mean, and I'm not asking this in a political party way. I'm asking this just from the standpoint of a society that is dealing with all sorts of events that doesn't have the capacity to change, to reform, or to make adjustments that are in the interest of the public in a way that makes the public whole. Where does this go?
Yeah, I wish I knew. I wish I had an answer for you. I don't. You have 2 parties, I think, like you said everything. You have 2 parties that I think the people have a right to believe don't really give a damn about them. Ultimately, at the end of the day. At the end of the day, you had me, okay, me. Now, you understand that I'm far right, okay? You have me on Twitter for a week telling my followers the only people that actually really give a damn about you in Congress are Bernie Sanders and AOC and Omar and Tlaib. I'm like, these are the 4 people that I can see actually are thinking about you.
Do you really believe that? And why do you believe that? I mean, I think that, look, I think Sanders has a massive heart. And I think he cares like nobody's business. He's been out there fighting tooth and nail like nobody's business. Even now, he's out there fighting and attacking Democrats over the next policy. But why do you believe that? And why do you believe that in lieu of other Republicans?
I disagree with their ways to get there. Understand that. But I don't doubt the sincerity of Bernie Sanders. And AOC and Omar and Tlaib are so young to the Congress, they haven't been jaded yet. They still remember what it's like to be a regular person struggling to make money and being a regular person. They still remember that. And I think they actually still care. Over time, they will probably be corrupted like everybody else was corrupted. But right now, I believe they actually care. I believe they wanted that $2,000 for people because they know.
30.
I really believe that. Now,
Carmack, we're going to have to cut you off here, but I really do appreciate you coming on. And I really appreciate the contriteness in explaining and talking about this. Honestly, I do. I wasn't sure what you were going to say, but I do appreciate the comments. Carmine Sabia, writer and editor-at-large at thesabiareport.com. You can follow Carmine on Twitter at Carmine Sabia and watch the Carmine Sabia show by going on to SabiaReport.com. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That means you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, at least 4,111, let me repeat that, we broke a record. At least 4,111 new coronavirus deaths and 280,028 new cases were reported in the United States on January 7th. Over the past week, there's been an average of 237,607 cases per day, an increase of 15% from the last 2 weeks earlier. As of Friday morning, more than 21,689,400 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 365,000 have died. Those numbers are astonishing. The global tally of coronavirus infection cases has exceeded 88 million, while the death toll is over 1.89 million, and the number of people who have recovered is 49 million. The United States, India, and Brazil are in the lead in terms of the number of registered coronavirus infections, while the highest number of COVID-19 related deaths has been observed in the United States, Brazil, India, and Mexico. Chinese officials ordered the lockdown of Xinjiang, capital of Hebei province, a city of 11 million people, as the coronavirus cases spiked there. The province neighbors the nation's capital of Beijing. The United States CDC is now carefully monitoring allergic reactions to the coronavirus vaccine. The U.S. Public Health Agency said allergic reactions are occurring at a rate of 11.1% per 1 million vaccinations. In comparison, for the flu shot, such reactions occur at a rate of 1.3 per 1 million flu shots. Yeah, per 1 million shots. Shane, we were talking about this earlier. How do you feel about that? I mean, I think, like you were saying, you basically just look at this as a percentage thing. And, you know, what are the chances do I have of catching it? What are the chances of me getting ill from some kind of comorbidity, since we, you know, at this point it's pretty well established that inflammation and COVID has a tendency to make those things worse. You believe that it's basically a better idea just to take it. What do you think about the people who make the argument that, hey, the vaccine isn't the way to go, you should just put out drugs that should slow the transmission of the disease down? What do you think about that argument that some people make on that front? By the way, I agree with you on this. I don't see anything wrong with this. And I'm always enamored by the science of this stuff. What do you think about it?
I think the classic phrase holds true: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you can keep people from getting sick, you will be much better off than if you either have to widely distribute medication, or if you have to wait for them to come into the hospital and be, you know, approaching death's door before you start to treat them for the sickness. That's frankly a large part of why we have vaccines. And then another way of looking at this, the medication is not a cure-all. It doesn't bring the, you know, if you're already in the hospital, if you're in the ICU, it doesn't bring your chance of death down to 0. It doesn't even bring it down to like 1%. It brings it down significantly, and it makes a huge difference. But there are still a bunch of people who would die, and so that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at this is one sense in which it makes sense to talk about herd immunity, I would say, is with vaccines. If you can get enough of the people, even those who, if you can get enough of the population vaccinated, even if there are going to be some people who don't take the vaccine who are at risk, they're much more likely to not get it. So from different perspectives, this is why you have vaccination programs. I'm not saying every vaccine is perfectly safe. Some of them, from what I've seen, have been made poorly, and some of them, might have been dangerous, might have caused long-term problems. I'm definitely not an anti-vaxxer, but I don't want to paint with too broad a brush on either hand. But when it comes to this particularly, I'm like very pro. I think, as I was saying an hour ago, I think we should have done this sooner. I think we should have gone through the trials much more quickly and started to prepare it. Another way of looking at this, we should have started to prepare it for mass manufacture from the beginning. If you think about how much of a public health emergency this was very obviously back then, and that this has very clearly become since then, we should have, even if we didn't know that it worked, you should be testing a number of candidates, and before you know anything about them, you should be ordering a certain degree of manufacturing. You should be spending billions of dollars, because that billions of dollars spent might avert trillions of dollars in economic damage, even if most of them don't work. Does that make sense, Jamarl?
Yeah, I mean, and this goes to the Sabia thing. Like, it's like, in talking to him, it's like, he's like, yeah, it's pretty bad, and the people are having it. It's like, but you realize those businesses were shut down because Trump and this government didn't respond. Like, it's one thing if Trump would have had the Defense Production Act, he would have had people wearing masks. He could have even said, be a man, wear a mask. You could have whatever propaganda you want around that stuff. But that would have been far better for his electoral chances, A, for the chances of businesses not closing down and shutting down, B, like, he would have been far better off. I know sometimes when people ask difficult questions in a debate, let's say, they ask you this horrible question that they're framing it wrong and everything else. Sometimes those questions are your way of knocking it out of the park. And when Obama got hit with the hurricane just before, the presidency, he hugs Chris Christie, and Republicans are angry at Chris Christie. How dare you hug Obama? Well, Obama wins that presidential election in part because he could handle a crisis. He was cool at, he's playing basketball and dealing with the hurricane. Well, if you drown in the middle of a crisis and your election is coming up, that doesn't look good. Meaning Trump's chances in this election would have been far better off by dealing with this virus in real terms. And honestly, even the economy would have been far better off in dealing with the virus in real terms. And, like I said before, his electoral chances. So, no, I agree with you, man.
Another way, you bring up Obama. I would have preferred Obama to be president. I don't like Obama, but I would have preferred Obama to be president during this kind of pandemic. Not saying he should have run for a third term or anything crazy like that.
Well, I think it would have been
when it comes to Hillary,
people died. I mean,
was the realistic alternative? Yeah, I'm not sure about Hillary, but I agree. Under Obama, less people would have been dead.
Wait,
because I think you're right.
Why do you think Hillary would have screwed it up? I'm curious about that. That's funny. Why do you think Hillary would have, screwed this one up, screwed the pooch?
Both sides of the dialectic. It's both the thesis and the antithesis. I think she would have been more austerity than Obama, and I think her response among the public would have been much, much more distrusting.
Interesting.
For all the people on the right didn't trust Obama, they saw Hillary as much worse. That's what I would say.
That's true. I agree with that part. Yeah, I think they saw Hillary worse. Agreed. All right,
briefly, I want to come back to something you were saying, because we talked about the mask and people who don't want to wear the mask, and I get some people have concerns. I don't mean to completely diminish your concerns, because I'd like to engage in conversation, not mere mockery. But another way of looking at this is it really masculine to kill your grandma? Is it really masculine to act in ways that are more likely to endanger your family, or should you put aside your ego for a second and take the slightest possible sacrifice? And again, I know it's not a lot of people are like, I'm a man, I'm not going to wear a mask. A lot of people are like, I don't think masks work. They're more likely to spread the virus. So I don't want to completely mispaint things, but there's an element of that for sure. I saw that, as a talking point months ago. I just see that as ridiculous. Anyway, Jamarl.
It is ridiculous. I mean, it's like all the excuses are entirely just done to get around wearing them. Like, for example, they would say, my oxygen level goes down. It doesn't. That's not true. Oh, they don't work. that's not true. They actually do. There's lab, peer-reviewed research showing that they do. Like one, thing after the next. So yeah. And as for the shot, I agree with you on the shot, especially bringing the doctors on and having this kind of talk about the science of it and how it works and those type of things. Those things, I think it's beneficial because I think it gives a window into stuff that people don't necessarily get. Meaning this kind of conversation about these elements of things that people don't necessarily get down in this kind of granular level. Like the explanation of mRNA, I thought was phenomenal on the show the other day what we had with the doctor. No, man, I think we've been covering this pretty well. But let's keep going. A healthy Miami doctor died 16 days after receiving the Pfizer vaccine. Dr. Gregory Michael began seeing small spots on his hands and feet 3 days after the shot. He went to the hospital. His blood count was not in the normal ranges, admitted to the ICU, then suffered a stroke and died. According to the United States CDC, there have been cases of partial face paralysis, as well as being fully paralyzed for hours following the injection. Shortly after Twitter unlocked Trump's account yesterday, he tweeted a video discussing the Capitol breach and Biden. He acknowledged Biden will be inaugurated on January 20th and described the Capitol breach as a, quote, heinous attack, unquote. The funny part about that video, we had difficulty pulling it, otherwise I would have shown it. But the funny part about that video is that Trump is basically attacking people that he backed up yesterday. Shane, have you seen this video where Donald Trump basically comes out and basically attacks the people who he was praising yesterday and egging on to attack the Capitol?
Yes, I did. And that's why I agree. He had already dug his own political grave.
Yeah.
And now he's attacking his ostensible supporters.
Yeah.
I mean, another way of looking at this, and this is a weird take, and I wouldn't have said this yesterday. It was the next day, and maybe this is even too soon. I genuinely do not think he was aiming at an armed insurrection here. I don't think he was personally trying to get a coup done. I think he was reactionary. I think he was responding to stuff. He was playing the figure of like a desperate political leader. He is a desperate political leader, and he was trying to stay in office. But I don't think he wanted a genuine armed coup. However, having said that, he is, I would say, bar none, at least 80%, up to 100% responsible for the events of yesterday because they were his followers. He was encouraging. The day of, he told them to march on Congress.
And keep in mind,
what are your thoughts on that, Jamarl?
The reporting is showing that he was trying to get Pence to basically have a coup. So whether he wanted the armed insurrection or not, I think he wanted them as pressure. And I think he was perfectly okay with them, let's say,
100%.
making Congress uncomfortable. Let's say it that way. Whether he wanted it armed, I don't think it would. I agree with you. I don't think he wanted the people to go storming the blade with guns blazing. I don't think he wanted that. Pressure?
To be very clear, pressure 100%. And to be very clear, he was trying to overturn the results of the election, which many would just say is a de facto attempted coup.
That is a literal attempt at a coup. Like, it's not even de facto. I mean, he was trying to get Pence to basically not go through with what Pence was going to do, meaning it's Pence's responsibility to basically certify the results and hand it over to Biden and shake his hand and says, welcome, Mr. President, that type of stuff. Well, he didn't want Pence to do that. And he wanted Pence to basically blow that responsibility off. Pence wouldn't do it. He attacks Pence. Now, Pence apparently was greatly upset. Some of the Republicans said that they was like, we've known Pence for a very long time. We've never seen him this angry. He was like, basically, I stood by Donald Trump the entire way through. I've been his wingman the entire way through. He turns around and attacks me like this when I don't go through with something that I don't have the capability of doing anyway. Fascinating intrigue, like the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, because Pence has been his wingman. And at this point, he started attacking Pence when Pence wouldn't go through with the whole coup stuff. It's utterly fascinating politics. But he literally was trying to take it. There should be no, people shouldn't be oblivious about that point. If he had the capacity to do it, he would have overturned this election result. So, the people shouldn't be cavalier about that point. A U.S. Capitol police officer has died from injuries sustained in the attack on Congress by a pro-Trump mob as top Democrats have called for the president to be removed for inciting the riot. Two of Trump cabinet secretaries, Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao and Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, are resigning over the riot. There are many administration officials that announced their resignations as well. I wish Betsy DeVos would have retired the first day she took the job, frankly. Thursday, world leaders reacted to the Capitol riots. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson issued a strong condemnation against both the rioters and his bro, President Trump. Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven condemned Trump. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani called Trump a, quote, sick person, unquote, who has disgraced his country during a televised speech. Konstantin Koshchevek, the chairman of the Russian Upper House of Foreign Affairs Committee, said the storming signaled the derailment of American democracy. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said during the meeting on Thursday that riots made her feel, quote, angry and sad, unquote, and she regrets very much that President Trump did not admit defeat in November and again yesterday, unquote. And Scotland's Justice Minister, Humza Yousaf, is calling on officials to deny President Trump's entry into the UK, blaming him directly for inciting a violent mob at the nation's capital. A judge in Baghdad's investigative court has issued an arrest warrant for President Donald Trump over the killing of an Iraqi paramilitary leader during the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani last year. Quote, after the completion of the preliminary investigation procedures, the judge decided to issue an arrest warrant for the outgoing President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, unquote, read a statement released by the Supreme Judicial Council of Iraq on Thursday. Iran also has an arrest warrant out for Trump in relation to Soleimani's death. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're taking calls. Phone lines are now open. 202-521-1320 is the number to call. Again, that is 202-521-1320. Another way of putting this, I said phone lines are now open. They're always open, but at this point, they are swung wide open. You can call in pretty much during any of our segments. During headlines, I would say that's the one exception, just because we're, talking headlines, usually having a conversation about them. And usually there's a sense of urgency where we don't get through all the headlines because we kind of get caught up talking about them. So anyway, first 15 minutes of the hour, don't call in. Last 45 minutes of every hour, feel free to. And then at the end of the show, we always now have a dedicated open call segment. And often during this time slot right here at 8:15 Eastern, we also have an open call segment. So 202-521-1320 is the number to call. Feel free to call in. Jamarl, crazy events. I want to go back just for the tiniest second to the Bitcoin thing. I know this is marginal compared to everything else that's going on, but as a cultural phenomenon, and
it's interesting.
Particularly,
it went through the roof yesterday.
It's been going through, it jumped, I don't even know, 3,000, the value of Bitcoin jumped like $3,000 yesterday, but over the last couple of months, it's been on a tear, so to speak,
now the
raising
question is why?
Raising its price like crazy.
Now, why is it going up like that?
A very good question.
Well, do you think it's going up like that because of the destabilization of the U.S. government? Like where a decline is just more obvious? I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, is it one of those things where it's like people are noticing, and as faith declines, they're looking for other means or other investments outside of, let's say, like the dollar or something like that they may consider a safer bet? I don't know. I'm spitballing, but I don't know why the number was going up. I'm just trying to figure out. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. And I'm making this kind of causal relationship between the events that happened yesterday versus the value of the thing. And that might be false. So
100%. And you know as well as I do, correlation does not equal causation.
Right.
But I think that's the sort of underlying deeper explanation for Bitcoin. It's certainly the one that gets touted by its most prominent proponents. Bitcoin is also used by sort of larger players to deal with their money in various ways. So either, if they're trying to skirt rules in different ways, or if they're needing to do a massive sell-off, trying to hide certain aspects of it. I don't mean to say it's all shady, but large players do that. And then it also has to do, I'm just going to point this out, has to do with, and this is a deeper underlying cause of the rise of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining and stuff, has to do with the massive influx and the development of graphics cards, like GPUs for computers, which I'm just going to point this out. NVIDIA, one of the main makers of graphics cards, there's basically NVIDIA and AMD, who are like the big competitors for GPUs. NVIDIA's most recent lineup, like the 3000 RTX series, has basically sold off like hotcakes ever since it was released late last year. And I would say a lot of that is not just people trying to play games, but people trying to use those graphic cards for Bitcoin mining and other proof of stake.
That's fascinating.
Cryptocurrencies.
Explain that. So explain the Bitcoin mining thing. So people basically mine those coins.
Yes. Yeah. And this has been around for years, and I'm not going to give the best explanation, but it's not mining with a pickaxe. Basically, you're using your GPU to try to solve complicated mathematical problems. And if you were the one person to solve a sort of complicated mathematical problem, which is deeply embedded in how Bitcoin works, every transaction in Bitcoin is basically lodged with one of these. You solve it with your GPU. GPUs are built to solve these specific kinds of mathematical problems as a class, like variants of linear algebra and problems like that. And every time you do that, basically, you will get a portion of a Bitcoin. Again, that's not the best explanation. I've never been too deep into this stuff. I never traded them or bought them or anything like that. But I've been following it for a while. Anyway, we got callers. And I just briefly, in summary, I could see that having to do with it. I can see it having to do with exactly like you said. The first explanation I would go to is the one that you gave, which is a distrust in not just the US dollar, but any currency that you're operating within. If you're worried about a market slump, in your country, if you're worried about the devaluation of your currency, you might go to Bitcoin as a sort of long-term speculative hedge against that decline. But we have callers. Let's go to Daniel from Texas. Daniel, you're on the line. What's going on, Daniel?
Hi there. I want to talk about the guy with the horns at the Capitol building. He's a crazy guy. There was a YouTube video before they took it down of him claiming to be a top secret super soldier, Native American, whatever. This guy was literally crazy. And I just wish YouTube, in their effort to remove the world of people they disagree with, is just leave crazy gold nuggets so we can make fun of them.
I can agree with that last point.
Yeah, the super soldier thing is always funny to me. It's like this person was engineered by the U.S. government, and he can leap over, 20-foot buildings, and he can take bullets in the back or something like that. It's fascinating stuff that they have. But this goes to the whole discrediting thing, where people are like, there's something else behind the scenes that I just know they're hiding from me. That's fascinating.
Right. I mean, they're always right.
Just right.
Clear.
Right.
Extremely clear.
I think I saw the guy who was talking about that. Where it was a guy in all this face paint. He had on like a
American colored face paint.
Yeah. I remember I saw that guy. I was looking for the picture of him just now so I could try to show the audience. I couldn't find it in my queue. But Yeah, I remember that guy. I didn't hear him talking, but yeah, they should have left him up.
He was the, you know, as he would be. He's wearing bullhead gear. He's like bare chested. I think he had like on some kind of like a fur tunic or something
Right.
like this, like a fur vest. And then he had like American flag face paint.
Yeah.
And by the way, when I said bullhead gear, it's like with horns sticking out of it. So he was the one who mounted the dais on the Senate floor in the Senate chamber and got a bunch of photo ops taken of him. And like he would be, had a bunch of pictures taken of him because he looked absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And that image, like, I mean, those images, I should say, is going to be seared into the canals of American history, into the depths of our memory of this event. That image, maybe more than the events themselves, and I'm kind of being facetious here, is just ruining what remains of the American legacy.
Does this destroy Trump's presidency?
Tarnished legacy.
Like, does this utterly destroy it? I mean, like, I've never seen a president do anything like this.
It destroys Trump's. It destroys Trump in general.
Yeah.
His presidency was already destroyed. But I mean, we got other callers. I think I don't want to. Got two other callers in the line. So I think we should go to them. But yeah, a lot more to say there. Tim, calling in from New York. You're on the line. What's going on, Tim?
Good morning, guys. Yeah, it's this whole thing of the last few days with all these with what's going on in DC and everything. I think this is what you get when you have a perfect combination of dishonest government that's not working for people, and also allowing under the First Amendment propaganda the likes of Shapiro, Turning Points, Mark Levin, Rush Limbaugh. You know, when you have this combination of propaganda that's allowed to be put out there, it just makes people think crazy things. Like, these people think like Trump is like actually different from a standard Republican. He's a savior or something from both parties. He's like, he's like the worst of Republicans actually, and they don't see. You
can see that in the Q movement. But Tim, I've got a question for you. You're talking about this as propaganda, and I think you used the phrase, it's allowed to be put out there. What would your response to this be? I mean, in other words, would you try to suppress that information, or would you try to respond to it as a government from various outlets?
It's complicated. I listen to the Convo Couch, and I think her name's Fiorella, and she believes that, Kyle Kalinske, they say they're absolute free speech and everything. But, for you to allow an industry of like extremely wealthy people, putting out lies intentionally to make people bonkers, you got a problem on your hands.
You do. And I agree with you. And my problem with it is, and it's a deep problem. It's like, there's no way of getting wholly through the straits between Scylla and Charybdis here, because on the one side of it, you're going to start suppressing speech. You're going to set up a precedent whereby speech is systematically suppressed, and we're already there. On the other hand, if you don't do anything to respond to it or try to push back on it in a deeper way, then what we're going to get what we see effectively, which is the rise of QAnon and the rise of increasingly unhinged conspiracy theories, alleging just the craziest of stuff. There's like a messianic leader in the deep state who's going to save us all from what's going on, and that Trump is the Messiah, like you're saying. So I hear what you're saying on that one, but I don't see a way of solving that problem, man. I don't see a deeper way of getting through it. But what I know is when you start to suppress speech, you start throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And at the same time as you are suppressing false speech, you're also suppressing true but dangerous speech that probably should be known about things the American government does, the governments around the world do, et cetera. So what's your thought on that, Tim? We've got a minute left before we go into a break here.
Square.
He might be gone. Jamarl,
yeah, he might be gone. That's not easy to square. I don't know if there's a way to square that. Because if you say you have free speech, okay, fair enough. Well, where does that end? Does that end? Does that have boundaries? In the moment that you say there's a boundary to it, well, at that point you have limits, right? Like, I can't scream fire in a theater because it's going to cause other people to get injured. Like, the question becomes, where are the limits of that speech? And what is the government or what are people supposed to do in order to limit it? I mean, because the caller has a point, right? I mean, if you have somebody who basically comes on and screams fire and says everything is, going to pot, like Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh has been a cancer in media. He has not been a positive influence in media. I would even make the argument about Fox News has not been a positive influence from the standpoint of media in regards to the stuff they shove into people's heads. But how do you stop Fox News from doing that? I mean, do you have a truth thing? Like, what do you... Like, you know what I mean? Like, do you have a truth rule? And what does that even mean 100%. To have a truth rule?
Well, because at the same time as Fox sometimes puts ridiculous stuff out there, they also, again, Tucker Carlson, not a saint by any means, informationally, but he was like the only establishment media figure that I could see pushing back on the lies about the Syrian war and the lies about the false flags there. So even in that case, you're getting mixed negatives, you know, you're getting mixed bads and mixed goods, to speak very simply about it. And I don't know how you're supposed to resolve that one. One thing that if it's possible, one thing that I wish we could do is just raise the sanity waterline, help the population, help the public, help people think more clearly, discern, you know, more artfully what's true from what's false. Because if they can do that, then you don't need to suppress it. You just have a larger public conversation. But maybe that's a dream at this point. In any event,
I disagree.
We're going into a break.
Oh man, I disagree. I think the tribal stuff comes into play. I honestly does.
I hear you. Let's come back to that later. We got to go into a break. We'll be back with Danny Haifong in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us is Danny Haifong, contributor at the Black Agenda Report and co-author of American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, a People History of Fake News. Danny, welcome to the show. Danny, can you hear me? Okay, well, Danny might...
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Oh, there you are. I wasn't sure if we had you. That's okay. How was your holiday so far? Everything going well?
Oh, yeah, as good as can be expected. Sure.
It was everybody's stuck in the house with COVID, so yeah, I suppose as good as can be expected.
Yeah.
I'm curious, from your perch at Black Agenda Report, what did you think of what happened yesterday? Meaning when you saw mobs of people raiding the Capitol? I think Nico House made the comment. He was like, who knew that you only had to be white to be able to raid the Capitol like that? It's like, that's all you had to be. What did you think about that? Like, I saw it, and like, I remember just looking, I was watching social media, going through the various scenes, shocked by the whole thing. What did you view it? How did you see all of this, of the events that were taking place the other day?
Well, it was surprising. I personally didn't know that Donald Trump was rallying, and I could have expected that if he was rallying on that day, that he was going to reinforce the message that the election was stolen, because that's what he's been doing ever since the general election really got underway and the votes began to be counted, and they started to look not in his favor. But I did not expect his very loyal supporters to do what they did. And what I really think about it is that it's a clear indication that the Trump phenomenon overall was always indicative of how the United States political system and its long roots in white supremacy and empire is now devouring itself. It was almost like chickens coming home to roost in many ways, because what the United States does abroad, what the United States does, all the terror that it's caused, really did go inward on that day, and it was perpetrated by those folks who really have the capacity at this given time to do such a thing, which is people who are so loyal to Trump, mainly white Americans who really do believe that they are being betrayed by their political system, and that Donald Trump is always correct and is really the person who can lead them back to some kind of American paradise that never really existed. But for them, an American paradise is one where Donald Trump is at the helm and where they can kind of exercise their racism and their loyalty to capital in the way that they see fit over the course of history. So it was definitely surprising, but it definitely shows this decay that the United States is going through. And honestly, one of my first reactions was, this is what happens when the elite on both sides of the political spectrum really create a political vacuum for someone like Donald Trump to take advantage of. And we see how many hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people from electoral standards, have been bamboozled by his political message, which combines both so-called economic populism with racism and really reactionary nationalism to achieve his own political ends. And I think that the capital kind of received what was coming to it at the end of the day by allowing these forces to be stoked and to grow.
Danny, I hear what you're saying to a certain extent. I mean, here's the way I see this, though, is while there may have been chickens coming home to roost, and while certainly the establishment created a sort of, not necessarily a power vacuum, because they've certainly tried to establish their own power continuously, but a political vacuum whereby people's needs aren't being met, and therefore you're more likely to see these things. At the end of the day, Wednesday's biggest loser was Trump and really any deeper opposition to the establishment, because it's not like the messaging around the country in the news, and for most people, even most dedicated political players, was there's a problem with our system. The message was there's a problem with Trump, and there's a problem with the Republican Party that Trump has come to represent and come to lead effectively. So, I mean, that's setting us up for a Biden administration, less than 2 weeks now, and a more emboldened and more powerful Biden administration, which will do more of the same of that political vacuum making that you were talking about there. So I get what you're saying, but I think the message that most people have learned will have been the exact opposite of that. It's not that the establishment isn't providing for their needs. It's that Donald Trump is a authoritarian madman, effectively, who was trying to get a coup done on his behalf. And whether, whether people are wanting to nibble away at that definition on the margins or to disagree with it in whole or in part, that's not where most people are now. And I guess where I would go with this is, what does that set us up for? Are you worried about this? Do you see any potential in the Biden administration with both chambers of Congress and the White House at this point? Danny, what's your take?
No, but you're 100% spot on. This is a huge contradiction that we're seeing kind of play out in front of our eyes. And while definitely Donald Trump, I've been saying it to others, that he will experience blowback from this for sure, because the forces in the elite on all sides of the political spectrum are seeing how his actions and his politics since the beginning, honestly, since 2016, are honestly a problem of convenience, a problem of public relations, and that it is bad for the so-called exceptionalist image of the United States. However, there's another side to the contradiction where, because there will be a heightening of, let's say, repression, because we know you're already seeing Donald Trump's Twitter account be taken off. We know that Donald Trump's politics have been used to suppress left politics as well, or anybody who follows outside of the establishment. We've seen that with Russiagate, and we'll see that with this. We see how people in the quote-unquote squad, the so-called progressive wing of the Democratic Party, have all fallen in line around, okay, we need to now focus on impeachment. And we know what Joe Biden is going to do, which in effect not only targets people of a progressive persuasion, but also then recreates the conditions for Trumpian politics, Trump's political message, and everything that it represents to also strengthen in the coming period because of what happens when the establishment buckles down and begins to concentrate its power. That's really part of the reason why Donald Trump and his brand of politics have taken off in the last 4 or 5 years. And so there is this contradiction happening where Trump, yes, there will be an immediate backlash toward him, but everything that Biden will do in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party will do from here on out will also serve to strengthen everything that we saw yesterday, those feelings, those sentiments, and that political branding will also have an opportunity over the next 4 years to strengthen even further, given that the establishment's reaction is going to be wholly reactionary and will serve no benefit to people on the left or anyone else who wants to see a real alternative to this bipartisan consensus on endless war and austerity. So I think this contradiction is really going to be playing out after, in the aftermath of this.
Danny, also to back up your point on this, I think what you're getting at is basically the economic factors that have pushed people to the margins, and the way that things have pushed people to the margins. In many large part is a lot of the consternation that is going through the public. I mean, I like to say Obama gave 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. Trump is going to give more. If it's like that number seems ungodly, and yet more will be shoveled into their gullets. And that's on top of all of the, large segment of the population, like 20% of the population basically falling off of a cliff. I think your point is that those conditions in and of themselves drive that sort of behavior. That even though the people who might have been at the White House were right-wingers, not all of them were there entirely because of the right-wing stuff. It's like the Jacob Blake shootings or some of the other shootings. It's like, yeah, you had a lot of people that were there, and yeah, it was a Black Lives Matter event. By the same token, a lot of people were there because they were angry that they might have been evicted, angry that this particular business was shut down, or meaning there were certain things that were going on in the society itself that was driving the anger in the behavior in the society. And like I said back then, people jumped onto the fastest thing moving. I think that the same thing may be true with the White House. Meaning, yeah, you have a lot of Trump supporters there. Yes, you have militias there, but you also have people there who are just angry at the condition of their country. Is that what you're getting at? That basically a Biden administration is not going to deal with the real material concerns of the public. I mean, for God's sake, Biden said he'd veto Medicare for all in a pandemic. And because he's not, that the group and the people that basically put Trump in office are just going to grow. They're basically not going anywhere. And for the next person that comes around, they will be waiting to elect that person in office. Is that what we're looking forward to? I mean, basically, is that what we're to expect coming up in the next, I suppose, in the next few elections, especially if Biden doesn't try to knock it out of the park, which I doubt he will?
Yes, I definitely think that's a huge part of this, because and this isn't necessarily a new phenomenon. When conditions worsen, when capitalism is in crisis, when there isn't a strong left alternative, when there isn't a really working class centered and working class led movement that is on the move, we end up with this so-called, and I don't even like using the term populism anymore because I think a lot of people have defined it in very right-wing terms, but you do end up with people like Donald Trump who end up exploiting the sentiments and feelings that people are having for their own ends. And with this upcoming administration, Biden coming into power, we are going to see the same stagnation without an alternative, at least for the foreseeable future during the Biden administration. And no one has a crystal ball, but we do know what the priorities of a Joe Biden administration will be. It will be austerity, as much as there are people who are hoping and probably begging at this time, especially on the Democratic Party side, that there will be some relief. Any relief that comes will come with so-called sacrifices that the Democrats have been.
Danny, totally agree with you. Let's do this.
Years.
Let's take a break. I'm going to bring you, Shane's going to bring you back. The voice that you guys are listening to is Danny Haifong, contributor at the Black Agenda Report and co-author of American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, A People History of Fake News. You can follow Danny on Twitter at SpiritHo and on patreon.com, Danny Haifong, and read his work at blackagendareport.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and our guest, Danny Haifong. He is a contributor to the Black Agenda Report and co-author of American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, A People's History of Fake News. You can follow Danny on Twitter at SpiritOfHo, on patreon.com/Danny Haifong, and read his work at blackagendareport.com. Danny, thank you again for being with us. I'm going to turn a little bit here, talking about the U.S. and China, a new book out, Capitalism on a Ventilator, The Impact of COVID-19 in China and the U.S. I believe you made a contribution to this book, and that's that's one of your connections with it. But there's another interesting side of this, and I want to talk about it. We can also have, of course, wider conversation about the parallels and the breakdowns and the comparison between China and the U.S., how much more effectively China has responded to this. But there's also another side of this, which is where you can't find this book. Specifically, Amazon blocked the sale of it. Can you get into that for a second, Danny? What did you contribute to this? What's your relationship with it? And then what are your thoughts on Amazon blocking this? Why did they do that from your perspective, Danny?
Yes. So my article was actually a contribution that was published both in Black Agenda Report first and then in the monthly review back in the summer, where I wrote about the summer of 2020, where I wrote about how China and Cuba were providing international support for the pandemic, and why we really need to pay attention to that, whether it was through Cuba's interferon medication, which was helping China actually with its initial outbreak, or how China was sending equipment all over the world to fight the pandemic in places like Italy and Iran, etc. And when this book came out, not more than a month and a half ago, what the editors found was that when they tried to publish it on Amazon, they got a message from Amazon saying that they only publish books from official sources on COVID-19 because it is a public health crisis. Now, what's interesting about this is that there are many books and other sources of information you can find on Amazon, which really pertain to this hypocrisy on them supposedly following the public health guidelines of avoiding an infodemic. They publish many things that say that the COVID-19 virus is a hoax and that China created the virus out of a lab. There are many books about that on Amazon, but yet when something comes out that actually compares how China did to the United States and really takes more than 50 authors and their contributions since January of last year to show the timeline and exactly how the United States failed while China succeeded, that is seen as unofficial and seen as something that should be suppressed. So that's exactly what happened in Amazon. Amazon has not had to answer for it because at the end of the day, Amazon's monopoly over information, its monopoly over distribution and consumer products is really all powerful right now in the United States.
How answer the question? How did they succeed where the United States failed? I mean, basically that's the premise. What was the main thesis of it? Well, how did some of these other countries, be it China or Taiwan, succeed in dealing with the virus as opposed to how we didn't deal with it at all in real terms, but how did they succeed in dealing with the virus? Let's go there.
Right. I think basically, because, there's so many aspects to this, but the basic premise and thesis is that China put human lives over profit, while the United States did the opposite. So, rather than wait and see and really put the priorities of whether to keep big businesses open and profits for a tiny few multinationals and financial institutions going, China decided that it was a priority to ensure that the most amount of human life would be preserved. And so immediately when there was human-to-human transmission proven with COVID-19 in early January, there were immediate actions taken. In Wuhan, which was the epicenter at that time, there was a lockdown, but around the country, there wasn't necessarily a lockdown, but there were strict measures put into place, and they were all put into place at the same time, restricting travel, restricting, businesses that weren't essential. There was an immediate priority on producing protective equipment in the form of masks and ventilators. And then there was also incredible things done, like building hospitals, 2 hospitals in less than a month, to ensure that there were enough medical facilities in the epicenter of Wuhan to treat COVID-19 patients and to properly isolate them. So the whole idea was to isolate the virus and to make sure that transmission was prevented. And China really did succeed in doing that, to the point where now, not only does it have 80 times fewer deaths than the United States, despite having a population of nearly 5 times more than the United States, but also it has contained the pandemic to the point where the only outbreaks you see are from international travel, and they're very small in character. And China has built up the testing capacity to make sure that when those outbreaks do occur, that they are properly vetted, and that there is a real possibility to keep the economy going and to isolate those cases that do emerge. So the United States didn't do any of that. The United States waited weeks and weeks, more than 2 months almost, to even respond to COVID-19, as China, as early as December 31st, was communicating with the CDC here, saying, hey, there is a strange pneumonia going around that we're looking into, and we're going to keep you posted. In the United States, what did it do? Well, it spent most of its time in the corporate media demonizing China, to the point where by March, there was already almost a public consensus in New York and around the country that everything China did was authoritarian and incorrect. And so there wasn't really a possibility to question the government here, whether federal, state, or local. And so what ended up happening is the United States ultimately stuck its nose up at all public health measures, and we've had such an uneven response that it led to over 300,000 deaths, likely more than 500,000. by the time we're done this winter.
So there are different ways in which I could push back on this. So we could talk about how I see Chinese leadership as more effective than American leadership. There's been a long-term stagnation in American leadership, but in my opinion, that would completely miss the point, which is most people historically over the past couple of decades have painted the differences between America and China as being primarily in terms of this older ideological socioeconomic dispute between capitalism and socialism. And you can obviously see this very, very clearly on the right to this day with Trump calling COVID the China virus, and with much of his support, all of it effectively following on with it, and with the Republican Party's hostility as a whole to it, to China, leading them to suggest that China is either suppressing their total death count, all that stuff. It's ridiculous. When we have done better than China, or when we have performed, in our opinion, in ways better than China, we have said that it's because of capitalism. And yet now, when China seems to have responded to this virus much more effectively, I don't hear that many people giving them credit for their socialism. And I say this as not a socialist. So I just want to say very clearly, I'm not going to take that line. I'm curious, Danny, where do you see the Biden administration, which, a Democratic administration, traditionally they've been more hostile over the past half decade, I'd say, to Russia. A little bit longer than that, of course, goes back to the coup in Ukraine. But where do you see the Biden administration going? How do you see them responding to China? How do you see them responding particularly to the international comparisons that are already obvious between America's response as the leader globally of this crisis and China's response, which is, as you've noted, been very, very effective. They have something like 1/400th, if I'm doing the math right, as many deaths per capita as the U.S., despite being the apparent origins of the virus. How do you see the Biden administration treating China internationally? What do you see them doing, Danny?
Well, I don't see much changing, and part of that has to do with Donald Trump and his administration's new Cold War that has been escalated. That didn't start under him, but it started under Obama. But it escalated intensely, especially since the pandemic emerged in Wuhan. But I also think that there's another factor here that will influence the Biden administration, and that's the fact that the United States is in economic depression, while China will be growing at a rate around 6 to 8% per year throughout the duration of his administration, and that will not be allowed to stand. So what I think will happen is that, well, I don't think that Joe Biden will take the same posture and tone. I do think it will be very similar policy-wise in the sense that there will be this humanitarian interventionist line taken around China to continue the new Cold War. And that will be primarily because the United States, the Democratic Party, Wall Street, et cetera, would be looking at China as a huge threat to its economic hegemony. And that's just based on the material facts that China will be growing exponentially more than the United States, especially in the next 2 to 4 years. And that pretty much aligns with Biden's administration. So there will be I do not believe there will be any sort of sea change in U.S.-China policy in the coming years.
Danny, we have about 2 minutes, give or take. What about the argument that Wall Street is connected closely with China and that Joe Biden, being very close to Wall Street, and this was an argument that I heard, I forget the name of the gentleman that made it, Glenn Greenwald was covering the professor as he was basically making this line of argument. That basically Joe Biden is close to Wall Street. He's close to the money interests of the country. And the money interests of the country is close to China. Whereas Trump didn't have those relationships in place in the way that Joe Biden does. The relationship with China and Joe Biden will be different because of such. What do you think about that? I mean, I understand the idea that that Obama was trying to use the Trans-Pacific Partnership as a way to attack China, basically, to triangulate in a sense. Whereas Trump was going more directly using these kind of sanctions and everything else. So I understand the logic that Joe Biden might come in and try to corral China and try to prevent it from expanding and growing and everything else. But if Joe Biden does have those connections to Wall Street and the way that the argument goes, will the connections between Wall Street and China constrain the behavior of Joe Biden from being belligerent towards the country? We have about 30 seconds.
Well, very good question. And this is peddled by people like Matt Stoller. And I think it's ridiculous in the sense that Wall Street, if you deal with the United States economically, you're dealing with Wall Street, of course. Wall Street is the leader of the corporations, is really the big financier of the U.S. economy. but it doesn't make up for the fact that there is a big conflict between elements of the capitalist class on China. And right now, what's winning the day is the need to contain China. And that's seen in policy from the military contractors in need of surrounding China with its forces, to the fact that even under an Obama administration, there was a huge shift to hostility and belligerency, even economic.
Danny, we're out of time. I've got to say thank you though for joining us. I appreciate it. Danny Haifong, contributor to the Black Agenda Report and co-author of a great book. We'll be back in just a minute with headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, coming to you live from across the United States of America in the Independent Corner. I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall with my co-host Shane Stranahan, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, first up in the headlines this morning in COVID news, the largest death toll from COVID yet, with at least 4,111 new coronavirus deaths and over 280,000 new cases reported yesterday, January 7th. Over the past week, there has been an average of 237,600 cases per day, an increase of 15% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of Friday morning, more than 21,689,000 people in the U.S. have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 365,000 people have died. And those, just to comment on that, continue that briefly, the death numbers just keep rising. The rate is bad. I don't know how else to say it. This is unlike anything we saw earlier this year. We were warned that as cold and flu season came on, we would see that rise, and we're seeing it sharply. And this, I will also add, is as news of a new coronavirus strain, which is more infectious, anywhere from 30 to 70% infectious, I've seen as sort of the range of expectations there, is now spreading unrestricted, apparently, other than the general lockdowns we're doing, with open community spread. And that's not going to be good either. We'll see the effects of that, I would say, within the next couple of months, and particularly late spring, early summer. We'll see when exactly that hits, assuming that does. And I'm worried that that's going to bring us something catastrophic, potentially over 10,000 deaths per day on certain days. But I don't want to sound apocalyptic or anything, but that's as bad as it could potentially get, legitimately, if the number of cases continues to rise this sharply. Anyway, the global tally of coronavirus infection cases has exceeded 88 million, while the death toll is over 1.89 million, and the number of people who have recovered is 49 million. The United States, India, and Brazil are in the lead in terms of the number of registered coronavirus infections, while the highest number of COVID-19 related deaths has been observed in the United States, Brazil, India, and Mexico. Chinese officials ordered the lockdown of Shijiazhuang, I'm almost certainly mispronouncing that, capital of Hebei province, a city of 11 million people, as coronavirus cases spiked there. The province neighbors the nation's capital, Beijing. The U.S. CDC is now carefully monitoring allergic reactions to the COVID vaccine. The U.S. Public Health Agency said allergic reactions are occurring at a rate of 11.1 per 1 million vaccinations. In comparison, for the flu shot, such reactions occur at a rate of 1.3 per 1 million shots. A healthy Miami doctor died 16 days after receiving the coronavirus, or after receiving the Pfizer vaccine. Dr. Gregory Michael began seeing small spots on his hands and feet 3 days after the shot. He went to the hospital. His blood count was not in the normal range, was admitted to the ICU, then suffered a stroke and died. According to the U.S. CDC, there have been cases of partial facial paralysis, as well as being fully paralyzed for hours following the injection. Again, though, that piece alone, you can take that as anecdotal. The fact that the rate of allergic reactions is almost 10 times as high as with most other vaccinations is not anecdotal. That's a systematic data roundup. But even with that, I would still say there's undeniably good cause for using the vaccine, for recommending its use. And as I was saying earlier, I think we should have put it out earlier. Jamarl, we've talked back and forth about this over both of our last headline segments. We've got other stuff to talk about, but what's your thought on that briefly before we move on?
I agree with you. I mean, like, the more that the doctors came on the show, the more we had the opportunity to talk about it and explain the science of mRNA in comparison to the regular, where they go about doing the DNA stuff. No, I'm on board for it. I mean, we have nearly 400,000 people have dropped dead. Something has to be done. It's almost like the severity of the environment or severity of the circumstance almost kind of compels or demands the action. So no, I think we're in agreement on this one. Yeah, that it should be out. I think we disagree that it should be put out earlier. I don't know about that part. Because it's still research, and you're still trying to figure out whether or not the efficacy of it, who it works for, those type of things. I think those things are important. But no, the vaccine, I think, is a vital part of trying to deal with it at this point. The horse is out the barn.
Yeah, just to be clear for those folks just tuning in or who haven't been paying attention to these segments, I'm the one who definitely thinks it should have been put out earlier. Even though it was experimental, I think a lot of lives would have been saved. But I'm not gonna take a hard line on that one. I get the conversation there. Anyway, nationally, in political news, shortly after Twitter unlocked Trump's account yesterday, he tweeted a video discussing the Capitol breach and Biden, acknowledged Biden will be inaugurated on January 20th, and described the Capitol breach as a quote-unquote heinous attack, end quote. This comes after just 2 days before, while the events were ongoing, he told the people breaching the Capitol building that he loved them and that they were very special people. I'm not sure what cognitive dissonance was going on there. I think he realized what dire straits he was actually in as members of his cabinet debated impeachment. And of course, there were wider calls for impeachment and the invocation of the 25th Amendment by Pence. So I think he saw which way the wind was blowing, but that's an act of very apparent political calculus reading.
I think he knew he stepped in it. I think that's what happened afterwards. I think afterwards he realized, oh God, this is bad.
I don't think he's ever going to recover from this at all politically. He will very likely face an abundance of charges on different grounds. And you know what? This is actually a new side of this. Do you think he's going to be in jail?
Oh, that's a good question. Man, that's a good question. Like, because the question before that people kept asking was, are they really going to go after Trump once he leaves office? And the thought was, maybe. I mean, Trump is not like one of them, if that makes sense. Like, I don't believe for a moment that Mitch McConnell liked Donald Trump. I didn't think he thought Trump was one of his types, if that makes sense. And so I didn't think he had the protection of, let's say, like a George Bush when he left office.
He's 1 foot in and 1 foot out.
Yeah.
And they were talking the emoluments clause, but he was president, so he's technically a member of the political class. But I hear what you're saying.
Yeah,
anyway,
but
what
now,
are you saying to Trump?
After this, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't know. Because I think it would have been a headwind to try to put a president in prison. It just looks like a banana republic on its face to do something like that. The problem is that when you have something like this happen, where it looks like he's inciting this, it looks like he's like reveling in it, and then comes out, you all are nice people. It's like, no, dude, they have attacked the Capitol, the building that you are constitutionally bound to defend. What are you talking about? Yeah, I think he stepped in it. And the question becomes now, with a tarnished, well, his image was already tarnished, but ripped to shreds. What happens afterwards? And when he leaves office, do they go after him for inciting violence? I don't know. I think it's an open question. Honestly, I honestly think it's an open question. Beforehand, I would have been like, oh man, I don't think they would do it. Now, I don't know. It's a prosecutor looking to make a name for himself, a Democrat that just wants to take the stuffing out of him. Yeah, I could see it.
Or masses. You're talking to individuals there. I could see there being a broad perceived mandate to put Trump in prison by many members of Congress, including many Republicans, after what happened. The corruption, the charges of corruption, or that he was benefiting his family, or that he was doing dirty deals. Those were one thing. Attempted coups are entirely another. And I think that there would be a perceived value in making an example of Trump for what he very clearly tried to do here. And again, I'm not sure that he was aiming for a violent coup.
No.
But he was very, very clearly aiming to overturn the results of the election.
Yes.
And he certainly didn't, on the day of the events, he didn't do nearly enough to try to back his supporters down. Another side of this, we got more headlines, but another side of this, Jamarl, I'm curious about your opinion. How do you think this is going to affect his following? What percentage what proportion of his following is going to change their tune on this, or are they going to stay just as radicalized, if not get more so? And this is again,
I think they're going to stay just as radicalized. I don't think his supporters go anywhere. I mean, I agree with you that there may be a large share of Democrats that are like, put him in prison, and they would like chest stomp as they perp walk him away. So yeah, I can see that. But I don't think
the talk of him having a media platform, I would say that's dead too. The talk of him having some sort of independent voice on the other side of this, who would air it? Any tech company would try to shut it down. And I could see there being a broad push and that being used, frankly, to pass laws that would be bad for all of us. I'm not saying I support this, but I could see there being a broad push to deplatform him on every level, to the point of restricting his access to certain, internet service providers, ISPs, if he tries to get hosted through them, that kind of thing.
Basically, you think he jumped the shark completely. Like this was so over the top that, like, for example, trying to get Mike Pence to overturn the election is one thing. That's in and of itself horrendous. Having and stoking what seems to be basically a violent mob to attack the Capitol is, that's a whole nother level. So you could be right.
This is another way to put this. This is a domestic political event, the likes of which I would say we haven't seen since the Civil War. I would say that it's been about 150 years since we've seen anything like this domestically. We've done tons of stuff overseas. 9/11, that's a borderline, but that was a sort of foreign event.
But
I would say
this attack on American sovereignty by internal elements. Yeah, not that. Well,
yeah. And so I think the same way that the Civil War was taken as a sort of very strong cautionary moral lesson by the American body politic to a rounding error, the vast majority of people. Sure, there are people waving Confederate flags still, including in the Capitol building just a couple of days ago, which is shameful, of course. But for the most part, people widely reject what happened during the Civil War, and we think we got to the other side of it with the Union winning. With this happening, I think the response will be sharp, and frankly, I think it should be. But we'll see what actually happens. A couple more headlines here. A U.S. Capitol Police officer has died from injuries sustained in the attack on Congress by a pro-Trump mob, as top Democrats have called for the president to be removed for, quote-unquote, inciting the riot. Two of Trump's cabinet secretaries, Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao and Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, are resigning over the riot. There are many administration officials that have announced their resignation as well. Thursday, world leaders reacted to Wednesday's riots. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson issued a strong condemnation against both the rioters and President Trump. Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven condemned Trump. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani called Trump a quote-unquote sick person who had disgraced his country during a televised speech. Konstantin Kosachev, the chairman of the Russian Upper House Foreign Affairs Committee, said the storming signaled the derailment of American democracy. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said during a meeting on Thursday that the riots made her feel, quote-unquote, angry and sad. And she, quote, regrets very much that President Trump did not admit defeat in November and again yesterday, end quote. And Scotland's Justice Minister Humza Yousaf is calling on officials to deny President Trump's entry into the UK, blaming him directly for inciting a, quote-unquote, violent mob at the nation's capital. That brings me to another thing, Jamarl, which is, you know what? For some reason, I had just had it and then I lost my damn train of thought. Let's just go to the next
Trump
headline.
Going into other countries and how those other countries will respond to him going to those countries?
Oh, no, I got it. It was the quote from Merkel. She's saying she regrets very much that President Trump did not admit defeat in November and again yesterday, quote unquote. He should have conceded right then. That's exactly what he should have done. If he had done that, if on Wednesday he had conceded, now he wouldn't have. That's not his character. That's not what he was set up to do. But if he had conceded on Wednesday, if he had not said that he loved the people who were doing this, and if he had told them more strongly to go home, I think he would be a lot more in the clear than he is now.
Well, it would have been an act of contrition. That's what it would have been. Because it would have been so much for him to come back and say, all right, this is bad. This is not what I wanted. This is not what I wanted. Look, I concede. I didn't win this race. We put up a good fight. I thought that there might have been shenanigans with it. Like, it would have been an act of contrition. But not so much. He loves them. They're nice people. They're good people. I think the reality of it is he was enamored by them taking the Capitol like that. I think an aspect of him liked it. That's what I think. I think he was enamored
because it was support
by it.
for his ego.
Yeah.
Because it was about him, frankly.
Yeah. It was like, oh, look at all of these people and what they're willing to do. I mean, when he gets enamored by the notion that I could shoot somebody on broad daylight and he'll, still back me. Well, right here, this. I could imagine him sitting there watching this with his ego just beaming. And he comes out and he gives an honest response. These are nice people. Like he couldn't even like say it. He couldn't contain himself. He that's the moment where you need to be this kind of hardcore politician where you just put your feelings to the side and just go out and do the, do your thing. He couldn't even contain it. It was like beaming out of him. Oh, these nice people are out here. Yeah, okay. He's not saying it now.
All right, a couple more headlines to get through here. I hear, yeah, absolutely. A couple more headlines here. Internationally, a judge in Baghdad's investigative court has issued an arrest warrant for President Donald Trump. That's over the killing of an Iraqi paramilitary leader during the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani last year. I'm going to quote here. After the completion of the preliminary investigation procedures, the judge decided to issue an arrest warrant for the outgoing president of the United States of America, Donald Trump, end quote. That is read from a statement released by the Supreme Judicial Council of Iraq on Thursday. Iran also has an arrest warrant out for Trump in relation to Soleimani's death. I'm going to say it, of course, nothing's going to happen there. People don't like Trump in the States, but what they really wouldn't like is any perception of foreign entities being able to take some degree of control over American political figures. That would serve as a pretty bad precedent. A couple more quick tech headlines here. Bitcoin has crossed the $41,000 mark for the first time. This is after months of fast upswing. After just 3 years ago, it had dropped to $3,000. A couple months ago, you might remember, Jamarl, we were talking about how Bitcoin had passed its highs from early 2017. And since then, it has more than doubled. Last headline, Bloomberg has posted an article confirming Jeff Bezos is no longer the richest person in the world. Elon Musk has now taken the title. Following Thursday's trading day, Elon Musk is worth $191 billion and Jeff Bezos at $187 billion. There's so much news today. That in itself is a significant headline, but we'll have to come back to that later. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Those are our headlines. And we are going into a break. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be back in just a minute with Kim Iverson. Be back on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Iverson. We are joined by Kim Iverson. She's an independent journalist and host of The Kim Iverson Show on YouTube, which you can watch by going to youtube.com/Kim Iverson. That's Iverson with an E at the end, so Iversen. Anyway, just in case you were going to go there directly, you can also search for her name and Google will fill in the rest. With that little tiny aside out of the way, Kim, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. All right. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, and we're probably going to spend the brunt of the time talking about the obvious thing, which is what happened on Wednesday. But I just want to put a note in, especially for Jamarl, but we should come back at some point while you're still here. I know you got to leave in about half an hour, Jamarl. We should talk about Movement for a People's Party, because I saw your video on that, Kim, the other day, and we should talk about that. But first of all, with what happened on Wednesday, any sort of summary thoughts here? What's your take on this event? What do you think we should be thinking about or noticing about this? Where do you think this is going to take our democracy, the left-right dynamic in the states, et cetera, et cetera? Kim, what's your take?
I mean, people are angry. People are angry, and we saw this in the summer with all of the Black Lives Matter protesters. And we're seeing this now with the, I don't know what to call them. What are they calling it? Election something protests? What's their term that they're using? Or I think they're just calling them Trump.
Well, I thought they call it Stop the Steal. Is that what you mean?
Right. Yeah. Stop the Steal protesters. Exactly. So I think we're seeing this anger that has just been bubbling up definitely over a long, decades in the United States. What's been going on with people, just the American dream dwindling away from people, the inability to achieve what we watched our grandparents and our parents achieve in this country, or even if you didn't see them achieve that because maybe you were an immigrant or your family was poor, but at least the opportunity to achieve that. And we're seeing all of that dwindle away, and people are just becoming more and more frustrated, and they don't really know where to direct all of their anger and frustration. And I think this year with the pandemic and how much it has crushed the average person and the poor, everything is just coming to a head. And I think for me personally, when I was watching all of it go down, I wasn't thinking what I was watching on the news. I mean, the news, I flipped back and forth from all the channels. And of course, CNN was being very, very hateful about the people. They were spewing hate directly at those people. And I'm sitting there watching that thinking, that is exactly how we got here. We got here because people have spewed hate at these people. And it's the same for Black Lives Matter, right? I mean, how did we get there? Because people were spewing hate at those people. And so when you continue to hate, this is what happens. People will become frustrated because ultimately their problems are not being solved and they don't feel heard. And that is what we saw over and over this summer. And, if you were watching MSNBC at all this summer, they continued to say over and over, well, this is what you would expect when people don't feel heard, is they take to the streets and they start to get angry. And sometimes, and they would say, we don't condone it, but sometimes violence happens. And, they certainly weren't spewing vile words at the protesters or at the people that were committing the acts of violence during the summer. They didn't have, they weren't spewing hate and vitriol. They were saying, well, we don't condone it, but, and we didn't hear any of that for these people because they're the, fat, white, Walmart, McDonald's eating people.
Oh.
And they don't get any sympathy.
Kim, that's not why they're not getting sympathy, and that's not this false equivalence between these two things. First, welcome to the show. I want to start there. Well, I want to start there. There is a difference. There's a marked difference in cops who kill 1,000 people a year, and 1% of the 1,000 people, meaning of all the cops that killed those 1,000 people a year, let's say 1,000 cops, only 1% get prosecuted, and even less than that 1% go to jail. Many of the people in the communities that those violence was taking place, where you would see riots or you would see people who were protesting. Again, 90-something%, I think it was like 99% of the marches were peaceful, but it wasn't entirely because they weren't necessarily getting heard. If you look at the Jacob Blake thing in Wisconsin, most of the communities, or if I'm not mistaken, all of the communities that are majority black communities are basically jails. When you look at some of the other locations that these crimes were taking place, where the cops were killing these people, the poverty was astonishing, even from the standpoint of the unemployment rate between blacks and whites in the various communities that these things were taking place in. I'm making the point, it goes beyond just not being heard. It goes into an environment in and of itself that people feel like they are stuck in, they can't necessarily extricate themselves from, that there's a societal effect from it. But also, it was a reaction. What took place with the siege on the Capitol was something different. Those things were not the same. I understand the argument of, well, wait a minute, both sides are trying to say something and both sides have a point. Fair enough. But there is a marked difference between a community responding because somebody got shot, and it happens over and over and over again, as opposed to a bunch of people that basically sieged the Capitol. And not just sieged it, you even had people who basically let them in. Like, I guess I don't get the false equivalence here between these two things. You believe that these two things are equivalent to one another.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely do. I mean, and if you've ever lived in a place like Idaho or Indiana or in the small towns of Illinois, like or Texas, like I have, you understand it. These people they're not living the high life. Have you ever been to a trailer park?
No. That's not my argument. Wait. Don't put me in the same place as the media. That's not where I'm coming from. I admit, and I agree with you, that a lot of the people, be it black or white, are in difficult situations, difficult circumstances that they can't find a way to extricate themselves from. The party structure in and of itself basically has abandoned them. It seems to be a race to the bottom from the standpoint of the party. And so I'm not looking at this from the standpoint of trailer park, et cetera. That's not my viewing of this at all. My issue with this is they sieged the Capitol of the United States as the president of the United States basically egged them on with the thought of trying to overturn the election results. If they got what they wanted, this country no longer existed as America. That's my issue with this. You understand that, right? Like, it's not that the people aren't in bad straits. I get it. Totally, I get it. It's not even that they don't have a complaint. I totally get that part. And under normal circumstances, I would have probably agreed with them if they were out there protesting and everything else. The problem is they violently sieged the Capitol. I just see a difference in that. Now, tell me why I'm wrong on this.
Well, I don't see a difference. In fact, at least these people, look, I don't condone any of the violence. First of all, let me just make that clear. I wish all of the protests, all the ones that happened this summer and the one that happened in Washington, D.C., I wish they would all remain peaceful. However, they didn't. None of them did. And I watched my city burn down to the ground almost in Santa Monica. And my own apartment building was invaded with armed looters. And we had to go into lockdown. I had to lock myself in my own apartment, afraid of people that were here in my building with guns that the police were trying to find, with 3 choppers swarming above us. So it was very scary. And I understand that what happened this week was also very scary. But I also, on one hand, Congress and our election elites, our elected officials, have been doing just as much, if not more, arguably. I could argue they have done more damage to the lives and have caused more death than any of the cops in this country have ever caused. And people are seeing that these elites that are supposed to be representing us, they don't represent us. They represent their donors. They represent the big money interests, and the establishment completely exists to undermine democracy.
Yes.
Not only in America, but around the world. I mean, in the last 20 years alone, when you look at an actual coup that has happened, the United States has affected coups in Venezuela and Iraq and Syria and Iran and Honduras and Libya. I mean, you name it. That's just in 20 years. So at least these people, I'm not making excuses for any. I think all the violence was bad, but definitely the violence I saw this summer was by far much more intense. And I also saw that at least these people were taking it out seemingly on the right people and not some poor immigrant business owner who's just trying to barely survive after the pandemic has hit their business. And now a group of people come along and smash up their business and attempt to burn it to the ground. They were taking it out on the wrong people. At least these people are showing up to Washington and saying, you people are causing our problems. And they're not wrong. I think those people are causing our problems. And so I don't, is it equivalent? No, it isn't really equivalent, because the damage these people did this week was nothing compared to the months that we endured this summer. But at the same time, it seemed grander and it seemed more shocking because of where it happened and the fact that all of these elite lawmakers had to be rushed out wearing gas masks, and they were, now they're freaking out. And I watch the news and I'm appalled because I sit in a city, in an area where we were looted. I mean, my grocery store was destroyed. And I sit here in this area and I see that, by the way, my uncle's business, I've got in Florida was also looted, completely destroyed. My aunt's business had to be boarded up here in LA. I mean, small business owners that are immigrant communities. And, I didn't see any of the outrage for those businesses on any of the news networks. I only see the outrage when it affects our precious elite establishment. And that does make me angry. I sit there and I watch the news and I think, oh, okay, so since it happened to them, now we're gonna really go after these people and we're gonna call them all these horrific names. And, after these people for 4 years have been told that they're elected, the person that they voted for, that person shouldn't be sitting in the, they spent 4 years telling all of us that the election was a sham. They spent 4 years telling us if it weren't for Putin, Donald Trump wouldn't have been president. They spent 4 years trying to get the guy out of office. And suddenly these people believe it. Suddenly they believe that, the election's a sham and they want to do something about it. And they're all shocked. And they act like, wow, this is, how dare these despicable people? I don't know, guys. I watched that and I think, I think that this was all inevitable.
Kim, we have to go into a break. I hear what you're saying. I agree that it's inevitable, but I'm going to reserve my condemnation, at least the brunt of it right now, for the right and for Trump specifically, for the words that he said and the words that his family said, the words that his lawyer said earlier on the day, on Wednesday, when they were encouraging this, when Giuliani was calling for trial by combat, when Don Jr. was saying that we would come for the GOP in their backyards and they'd have a good time doing it, when Trump was calling on his protesters to march to Congress. Admittedly, he said peacefully, but still, he's calling for them to march to Congress. Hours later, they're breaking into the Capitol building. We have to go into a break. I want to come back. I want to talk about the differences, the different causes of this, and how I don't think we will learn any lessons from them based on this event. And that's sad to say. I don't think we will. We'll see where it goes. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and our guest, Kim Iverson, YouTuber and political analyst. Be right back.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. Don't surrender.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Iverson. We're joined by our guest, Kim Iverson, independent journalist and host of The Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. You can watch that show on YouTube at youtube.com/Kim Iverson. And you can also call in. We're opening this segment and the next one to calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. Again, that's 202-521-1320. So Kim, I've heard people on at least two fronts now saying that effectively the chickens have come home to roost. There's our policies foreign and domestic. Policies foreign, we have overthrown governments left and right, mostly left, willy-nilly, all over the place, practically constantly, beyond my living memory for literally decades, approaching centuries at this point. And domestically, like you're saying, politicians, the people these people were marching on, to be clear, have also completely failed, completely derogated their duties to provide for the needs of the American people. This, as they have last year shut the economy down and not provided nearly enough recompense to the economy, to the people that compose the economy, the people who, like you're saying, like you said, your family, small business owners, and just many of the working class, the majority of the working class in America have faced unremembered deprivation going back to at least the Great Depression. So whether it's foreign or domestic, I agree there's an argument to be made here. However, I don't think we're going to learn any lessons from this on either of those fronts. I think that this has aggravated the situation in both of those cases. When it comes to foreign policy, I'm going to quote here from Ben Rhodes, Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications and Speechwriting under Obama. Quote, "This is the day that Vladimir Putin has waited for since he had to leave East Germany as a young KGB officer at the end of the Cold War," quote unquote. Robert Reich, former labor secretary, saying, quote unquote, Putin won. Just that as a tweet. Greg Miller, Washington Post contributor, quote, Putin, forever scarred by humiliating scenes of the Soviet Union's collapse, must see what is happening in the U.S. Capitol today as utter triumph, end quote. That seems to be representative of how the establishment, specifically Biden's establishment, is going to respond in terms of our foreign policy. So we didn't learn there. And domestically, all I see this doing is weakening any perceived legitimacy of the opposition to the establishment. Biden, this has made him stronger. He will use this as leverage politically in his incoming administration to do more bad. I mean, I would say that Trump largely bungled our coronavirus response, and admittedly, he was hamstrung by the media, by his own White House, et cetera. But I'm not going to defend him on that. I'm certainly not going to defend him on this. I would argue that what he incited here will incite a lot more in terms of the sort of dialectical response that the incoming administration is going to have. Kim, I don't want to talk for too long. What's your take on that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree that nothing absolutely will be learned from this. Instead, we're just going to see, they're going to use this event for years, for the next 4 years. They're going to continue to, of course, the Robert Reich and these others are saying, oh, it was Russia, Putin, like as if we hadn't heard that for 4 years. And what they're going to do is they're going to continue that narrative and make it seem like half of America is actually, they're all Russian assets. I mean, I get accused of being a Russian asset. I'm sure you guys do for sure. So we're all Russian assets. Half of America is Russian assets. And they're going to use that in order to silence people, in order to delegitimize people. And they're going to continue this for the next 4 years to ensure that Democrats remain in power come 2024. Because, oh no, if they don't, then Russia wins. And look at these acts of sedition. And, it's going to be all treason in their minds. So I don't think anything at all will be learned from this whatsoever. I definitely think things could get worse. I thought for sure, Trump leaving office, finally things would calm down, but obviously they're not going to calm down. I don't know if we're going to see something as bad as what we saw this week with them going to the Capitol building and actually breaking in. I mean, although I could see that happening. But I don't know who would actually be the ones doing the actual breaking in. They might dress like Trump supporters, but I mean, who knows? I don't want to sound like a big old conspiracy theorist, but it's not a conspiracy when you know that we have been doing that exact tactic all around the world for, like you said, beyond our lifetime. We've used these strategies of using information and getting a person on the ground to light them, be the match that lights the spark, and then let the people that are angry do the rest. That is a common play in trying to overturn governments, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was a play used this time to overturn a movement, to stop a movement dead in its tracks, and to ensure people are silenced and to ensure that they're censored. Because now we're seeing greater calls for censorship. We're seeing the New York Times posted 2 articles yesterday calling for more social media accountability because it was their fault that this happened. So what does that mean? Censorship. We've got lawmakers who are trying to oust duly elected lawmakers. You've got AOC and Cori Bush from the squad going around actually trying to get some of these lawmakers who are going to challenge the Electoral College ousted, duly elected by their people. They're trying to get them undemocratically removed. So I think it's going to get worse because, these people, as much as people want to think they're stupid, they're not.
And I wouldn't. That's a pretty big leap, a pretty big point of conjecture to say that you think it might have been. I assume you're insinuating intelligence services to instigate all of this. I mean, there's enough information at this point to show that it seems like the cops were tacitly approved of some of it, or at the very least enough cops and military to actually get access to the premises. Like, not necessarily a situation where it was the CIA. Look right here. This is Politico. One current Metro Police officer said in a public Facebook post that off-duty police officers and members of military who were among the rioters flashed their badges and ID cards as they attempted to overrun the building. Quote, if these people can storm the Capitol building with no regard for punishment, you have to wonder what they do when they're in their uniforms, the officer wrote. Meaning, yes, they stormed the Capitol, but at the end of the day, they had people who tacitly approved and who assisted in the storming of the Capitol, not a CIA thing. I mean, look, there's some things that people exploit. And I think this is going to be one of those things that the Biden administration and Democrats exploit for censorship effect. You had Elizabeth Warren already talking about censorship before any of this ever happened. She was talking about putting people on criminal charges. The response to this, and beyond the response to this, let's go to something else. There's a slight pivot. The election coming up, Joe Biden most likely is going to be pushing through some kind of austerity program. I don't believe for a moment that Joe Biden is going to try to do anything significant or major in regards to this term, despite winning the House and the Senate. What happens? In 4 years, so let's say 2 years, the next election that comes around, when Obama was thoroughly punished, I think he called it a shellacking. We've seen in both the administrations, be it the Obama administration or the Trump administration, both starting off with the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and losing it all before the end of it. Why? Why are the political parties unable to basically maintain a governing majority? The Democratic Party at one point had the House of Representatives for like 50 years, minus maybe 2 or 3 flukes of terms, and all of that changed when Bill Clinton took office. So what do you think happens in, let's say, the next terms going forward? Put on your prognostication hat for a moment. What does Biden do in that office, and what is the result of Biden's actions going forward?
I think you're right. Nothing's really going to change. I don't think he's going to do much to help the people. I think they will maybe do some student loans, relief, but that doesn't really help the people who are actually suffering from the pandemic the most. And I think that they will probably do a lot more to get social media censorship. But beyond that, I doubt there's going to be much more that happens. But I do want to make just one last point on that is, the reason I think that there maybe were some, I'm just speculating completely. I don't have evidence to it, but why I would think there could have been some sort of CIA operation going on there is for 2 reasons. One is the reason you just mentioned, which is you saw law enforcement complicit. So it isn't a large leap in my mind to say, well, if there were some law enforcement that were complicit, that potentially there were more. Just add another layer to it. Secondly, because I think there was a real growing threat and thinking coming from much of the establishment that Donald Trump would run again in 2024. And if he left office with fanfare and people thinking he was great, and even Republicans still flanking around him, there would have been a real chance for him to come back in 2024 and run again. And I believe they needed to make sure that absolutely could not happen. And if we see in the next few days, which seems odd, that people are saying, well, why would they talk about impeachment when he's only got, 12 days left in office? It's because if he is impeached, he cannot run again. If they use the 25th Amendment, he can. But if he's impeached, he can never run again. And I think they want to ensure that that man can never run again. So this event sort of helps make the case for an impeachment as they've continued to try to impeach him over and over again, even after their attempted impeachment the first time. So that is why I would think logically why they would actually want to cause some chaos and kind of and of course it's not just them, and it never is, even when they do it in places like Venezuela. It just takes a few of them to kind of egg it on and get the rest of the people to do the rest.
Basically provocateurs. The stuff that they used to do, what is it called? The COINTELPRO and some of these other things where they was, especially for left-leaning groups. It seems to be one of those things for left-leaning groups. All right, so let's do this. And I can see your point. I do see your point on that. I think Trump was particularly an ogre. I think the intelligence hated his guts and they would leak everything on him, which gets across the difference between, let's say, it leaks by Assange, which everybody, the intelligence hated, or leaks on Trump, which everybody, for whatever particular reason, loved. And they would always basically run it. So I can kind of see where you're coming from with that point. Let's do this. You're staying with us. I am going to have to leave. I have an appointment. And so I'm going to tell the audience goodbye now. You guys probably won't see me later today. day. I have a procedure that needs to take place. So I'm going to tell everyone goodbye now. Kim, I always enjoy having you on the show. We always argue. The argument's always good-natured, and so I always appreciate the back and forths, and I always appreciate your point of view. So absolutely, thank you for coming on. You're going to stay with us, and she's going to be Shane's back and forth. They take calls. But Kim Iverson is an independent journalist and host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. You can watch Kim's show on YouTube at youtube.com/Kim Iverson and follow her new Twitter account at Kim Iverson Show. Wait, I thought you left Twitter. You're back on Twitter?
I don't have it. I don't have a Twitter account.
I thought it says her new. Okay, you can follow. Okay, so she does not have a new Twitter account, so ignore that last line. All right, guys, let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back with the wrap. And of course, we'll be taking calls. Thanks all.